All right, welcome to the Owl Podcast. My name is Jerry Gonzalez. I'm here with Jameson McMillan.
Hello.
And Andrew Willie Wilson. Gentlemen, how are you?
Doing great, Jerry. How are you?
Splendid,
Good.
thank you. Quite wonderful.
Right. Well, this is a podcast where we kind of just discover topics that we are interested in and a little bit of hot topics of today. So I guess we're just going to dive right into it.
Hot topics, the retail locations. And either, really.
No shirts.
Castiel would say hot topic.
Yeah.
Snap.
Did you guys already do your shots?
I didn't.
I've been sipping on mine. Oh, let me refill.
Okay.
You get at it,
Before
buddy.
we refill, while I'm walking away, Willie, last time we didn't get a chance to introduce you, so just as a lead-off question, we're going to ask, what are some of the things, what are your political views, where do you stand politically, sort of on the Overton window, where would you describe yourself, left, right of center, would you describe yourself as a liberal, conservative, libertarian, just some, round yourself out.
Okay, so just some high points about how I
Yeah.
think about things. Honestly, it's a tough question in this day and age. Politics is really, in 2018, it's a clusterfuck. It's frustrating because I do have a lot of liberal viewpoints. I don't see the point in controlling anybody. I don't think you should impede or limit what people want to perform to themselves, what they wish to imbibe, inject, fuck. I don't understand why that's anybody's concern. Fiscally, I'm pretty conservative. You need to have a decent head on your shoulders financially. I mean, some degree of safety net as a country is important, but within reason. Left to center, I think, would be the best way to summarize how I look at things.
There has been this new kind of political movement, which is hard to describe, where people describe themselves as socially libertarian, would not really, or I guess would side more with social liberals, where they would, be for LGBT rights. They would, they would say, oh, I don't really care, what you do as long as you're not harming anybody, the classical libertarian standpoint.
Yes.
But would describe themselves as fiscally conservative. And that's kind of a hard thing to label yourself as, because there's not really a quite a party that fits that description.
Well, I think that's exactly
Yeah.
what I'm saying. I mean, we watched the 2016 election unfold, and it just laid bare just how biased and how fucking corrupt
Yeah.
both of the respective parties in a system that only has two legitimate parties. I know there's other parties out there, but I mean, come on. Good fucking
There was
luck.
a whole movement out there to get Gary Johnson's debate.
Yeah.
So that way they can try to get that third person involved.
Yeah, I mean, that right there is the perfect example of why I'm not going to paint myself one thing or the other. Like, I'm a registered independent. I'm staying that way because, I agree with, let's say a politician comes along and he's just like, why are you being mad? Like, why are you bothering the gay people? I'm like, that's reasonable. And he's just like, what about drugs? People should take them.
Yeah.
We could tax the piss out of them. That money is going to go somewhere else. Prohibitionist policy hasn't worked in this country. We have a track record of it not working. I mean,
Look at Colorado with their marijuana laws.
yeah, 287 is being paved all the way to Laramie, and it's gorgeous. Thank you, marijuana.
Yeah.
Kids are getting
But
books at
Do you
different
guys
school
think
districts all
that
over
the
the country.
Democratic Party and the Republican Party are really, I think Trump and Sanders really just kind of were the first people to really introduce us to what politics is going to be from now on, right? The Democratic Party has just sided with progressives, and Trump, you can't really describe him as conservative, but, it's just whatever their ideologies are, right? It's just Sanders versus Trump at this point. And then everybody else is just kind of left to figure out what they're going to do.
Well, I mean, it's sensationalism. I think what we're seeing is a byproduct of a 24-hour syndicated news system that does nothing but look at the absolute extremes of a situation. Why do you think we have a president that is as ridiculous as he is right now? I want a regal, relatively boring, studious fellow making my policies, shaking hands with, the international so-and-sos around the world. We got exactly, I think, what this country has been heading towards, in the sense that we have somebody that is very extreme, very, very loose-lipped when it comes to saying his opinion, is very duplicitous in the background of what he is saying as far as truth or lie, and the fact that he kind of blends them together pretty effortlessly. I mean, ultimately,
It's not the president we need, but the president we deserve.
kind
basically.
of, sorta.
Yeah.
I mean, really, you had a decent candidate in Bernie Sanders. Yes, some very, very hard socialist standings that were a little bit idealistic for a man his age. But you had somebody that was very popular in the Democratic Party, and they fucking buried the guy. I mean, it was a whack job.
Literally, they plotted against him to get Hillary to be their candidate.
That's precisely my point.
So not to do too much of a postmortem on the 2016 election, we can if you guys want to. But
Sure.
No, let's keep moving forward.
How am I politically affiliated?
No. I just mean we can do a postmortem on the 2016 election as
Sure.
to how Bernie, because I disagree with, I don't know, Jim, your position, but I disagree with the stance that the Democratic Party was rigged, or at least the DNC rigged the election against Bernie, for example. So we can go down that route and kind of do a postmortem as to what happened in the primaries and what happened in the 2016
It's a
election.
pretty deep rabbit hole to jump down.
Yeah, so we can do a whole podcast on that. I think we could spend 2-3 hours on that. But what I was trying to get at is how different the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are, right? Because right now what you have with the Democratic Party is just what you would consider something like a neoliberal, like kind of a little bit left of center, but not as progressive or as socialistic as Bernie. Everybody just kind of moved left, and everybody just kind of moved right if you were a Republican. And there's not really anywhere for this middle to move.
I think it's really interesting. There's this odd sort of magnetism that is going on in contemporary politics where you have this extreme polarization and people are just all the attention and a lot of different focus is going to these polls, so to speak. So, I mean, you have on the left side, I mean, you have kids that are demanding, they're having white free days in fucking Evergreen College,
Yeah.
which is hilarious because, like, that is, I mean, if you can't see the irony in the statement of that being a person who was maybe a few generations ago oppressed, I mean, goddamn, I mean, I laughed out loud when I heard that. I mean, that's like, really? Like, really? Like, really? Like, you come this far. Like, I understand what you're trying to do, but as a movement, especially if somebody sitting 1,000 miles away is watching the TV and they're seeing what you're doing, I feel it's something I talk about at work a lot. So I sell technology, communications, fucking cell phone salesman. It is so ironic that I have seen the advent of this technology over the past 7 years allow for effortless intercommunication, yet it has allowed people to pool into their own little sound barrier, or these little echo chambers where they don't get to communicate with anybody who has dissenting opinion. And furthermore, it's considered like almost an affront to your beliefs to be around somebody who doesn't think what you think. That's fucking crazy.
So, Jameson, I'd like to pose a question to you. You're more right of center than probably me and Willie. How would you look at this sort of infighting within the Democratic Party? Like, is there anybody left of center that you take seriously? Is there anybody that kind of captures your attention? You're like, oh, that's a good point, right? And then also just kind of a broad overview. How would you view the fighting? How would you view the Democrat? How would you start taking the Democratic Party seriously versus what it is now, which is a total circus?
You said it yourself, the Democratic Party is a total circus, which is why I think we have the president, Donald Trump. You had people essentially fighting within the Democratic Party, and just I feel like they were splitting the party right down the middle there, which has caused us a lot of division. And Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump kind of had a few different points that were very in line with one another, not necessarily on the socialist views, but that's, I think, essentially what swayed some people that were big Bernie supporters to vote for Trump, which is why now, like I said, Donald Trump is our president. But as far as like anybody that I really respect on the left side, it sounds kind of silly, but every once in a while Bill Maher will say something that I actually agree with, especially his stance on like Islam and Muslims, which a lot of people on the left are like, no, you can't say that about them. And I'm like, but he's right, you know? And that's about the only extent with him that I've ever really agreed with. But
Bill Maher's a good example, I think. Bill Maher's just somebody that I respect. I disagree with him, especially on his kind of weird stance on vaccines. He's an anti-vaxxer. He has,
Seriously?
Yeah, he
Bill
has,
Maher?
Yeah, he has a position. He's a big Bernie supporter, which I disagree with him on that. But little quirks that I would disagree with him a lot on. But I really like that he's kind of a liberal that just kind of is a liberal for his. He's a very principled person, and I can appreciate that. And he's somebody that I take seriously, even though I have a lot of disagreements with him.
agreed.
Well, see, that right there is precisely the point. You need to speak to all walks of life, to all opinions. because it hardens and solidifies your ideas. Not hardens a bad word. I would say it tempers it, because the influences of what is around you give you a better perspective of what the world is. I can go around thinking a thought, and then once I interact with somebody, they might mutate or alter that thought, which is good. I had one thought for a very long time. He worked under George Bush. Scary fella. Dick Cheney. His daughter's a lesbian. He was very staunchly anti-gay for most of his political life. And when his daughter came out, he changed gears on that. And simply put, it's like, well, my own flesh and blood, my daughter is this. So I can, in good conscience, hate my daughter.
Well,
So
the
not
flip
all people are evil. I'm like, okay, that's reasonable.
The flip
Please.
side of that, though, Hillary Clinton essentially did the same thing. You can find so many different videos on her saying for so many different years, all the way up until I think even 2000.
13 or
12?
14.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where she's basically saying, like, marriage should be between a man and a woman, and all of a sudden when it benefits her politically, all of a sudden she's like, yeah, gay marriage is cool, woo, go team.
Oh, she won an office.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
very,
So it's
very
just-
obvious what she was aiming
It's
at.
just saying
Hillary-
that both sides are very flip-floppy. I mean, they'll...
Yeah, but Hillary is, I think, what's so interesting to me about Trump is that Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama are the last, sort of the vestigial tale of the Cold War, of the traditional politicians. You're not going to have anymore the Obamas, the stand-up politicians, the guys that speak very properly. That whole era is over. What you have now with Trump is a populist to a certain extent, and you had the same thing with Bernie Sanders. He was an economic populist, and this is the new age of American politics. And Obama, Hillary Clinton, who was just very politically correct. She thought she could follow polls, and she thought she could just focus group every sentence and say, yes, this is how people polled. This is what the people want. This is how I'm gonna,
People perceived it as overly mechanical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between a Trump and an Obama, and that's why people were so, galvanized to vote for Bernie Sanders, because he was just saying things, and he was just saying for what he believed in, and people rallied around him.
He was presenting new ideas, too, that weren't commonly heard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, true, to an extent, but I think Bernie has been saying these ideas for a long time. He's been in office for a long time.
He's
and
been a man of his convictions since his 20s.
Yeah, and he's a Trotskyist, and I disagree. So Bernie, I disagree with him on a lot of things. I think his positions on socialist governments have been completely immoral. He was a supporter of the Sandinistas. He publicly praised Chavez, and he publicly praised people like what's the Cuban dictator Fidel Castro.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He was a lover of communist dictatorships, and these dictatorships were obviously, goes without saying, mass murderers. They imprisoned thousands of people. So I disagree with Bernie on those aspects. His blind spot for what communist dictatorships actually brought to the world. So, but to kind of segue into this, I think we are at the end of the classic politician. We are more in an era of populism, and especially economic populism.
I could see that. I mean, it's especially with the advent of social media becoming so prevalent and so fast. I mean, you turn me on to this. If you want to follow a news story and catch up to it on a more quick basis, I mean, turn off the news. Turn off, New York Times, your application. You might as well just hop on Twitter, because they're going to cover it way the fuck faster.
Even Snapchat is way faster these days, too.
So
That's true, yeah.
So here's a good talking point. So, and this will segue us into what is kind of prevalent in the news right now. The whole immigration thing, especially with children being separated from their families.
That was happening
Right.
under the Obama administration.
So yeah, exactly. So people in the
And
Obama
Bush.
administration, it's a little bit different. It's different to an extent of what Obama did versus what Trump did, and we can get into all of this. But just kind of a very broad overview. The social media has changed our entire perspective on immigration and how we respond to stories. Right, you're able to see the separation of children and their families instantly. Right, you're able to see the children in cages. Right, so this should segue us into as Willie was talking, the advent of social media and how it plays a role in our politics, and then we can kind of segue into what we think about immigration. All right, so just to get the podcast really percolating, Jameson, I'll pose a question to you because I know you are more conservative, and how would you juxtapose what the Obama administration did with what Trump is doing now, and also to tie it in a little bit to social media and just kind of how quickly we respond to stories?
Can we circle back around to me on that so I can think about it?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I'll chime in on that.
So Willie, you were saying, the advent of social media, in order to follow a news story, right, you have to log into Twitter, right? You can't wait for the nightly news anymore.
Mhm.
And so I feel like this changes a lot of things, right? We're so quick to respond to stories without really.
You see, quick is the problem I have.
Yeah.
So my background in field of study in college was English literature with a focus in political science. Took a lot of anthropology, took a lot of statistics, took a lot of journalism. What those respective fields taught me was to be very, very skeptical of what news you are receiving. Mm-hmm. You're telling me this. Okay, why? Where's that information coming from? More importantly, do you realize there's a bias in the information that you are giving me? Is it coming from a place of anger? Is it coming from maybe a monetary incentive? So my biggest problem with social media, because I don't participate in social media much, and I think it's because I'm just exhausted staring at technology all day. I don't feel like going at home and talking to some asshole who's fucking 1,800 miles away from me. If you really want to talk to me, call me or text me. You know what I mean? Like, I have mediums to get a hold of me. But I think the biggest problem I see right now with social media is that people are getting, they're getting inundated with very like-minded commentary, which is scary. You can't have non-opposition to your thoughts, to your opinions, to your news sources, because it gets dangerously close to a tribalistic way of thinking, and it can digress in very dangerous ways. And I think we're seeing certain groups operating right now. Antifa is one of the first ones to come to mind. I feel as though there is an ignorance in this like-minded symptom. On a second note, what I've seen in social media is people have a tendency to impulsively respond. They see something, they'll read a sentence or two, they won't fact check it, they won't pull multiple articles, they won't say, okay, what's the context on this? Hang on, before I get pissed and before fuck you, you should die, you fucking asshole, man, send. People have a tendency to spew bile before they actually take a time to let it digest and truly think about what they've perceived as information. And those images that we saw about those migrant children, or immigrant children, pardon me, sitting in cages. Nobody wants to fucking see that. But let's take the introspective lens a little bit further back. I mean, one of the big reasons the protests in Vietnam were so virulent is because we had access to film and footage and media. We saw the kids getting blown up. We saw people dying. We saw the napalm and fucking phosphorus burns of the kids stumbling out of their villages in Vietnam, and it pissed people off. To see it as visceral, to hear about it as something different entirely. And when you're plugged into something and you have constant information and you have people dictating how they think you should act, I think that can be kind of dangerous.
So we had this information when Obama was doing this.
Sure.
And he, to many immigration activists, was known as the deporter-in-chief.
Yeah.
Right? So what I'm trying to get at here is, and what I'm trying to juxtapose here is why Democrats weren't so, and I know that there was a lot of immigrant activists who were very pissed off at Obama, but why you don't have, Rachel Maddow up there, bawling or crying, whatever it is, at the fact that Obama was doing the same thing, right? If we are privy to all this, information.
Well, it goes back to the angle that you're trying to pitch, and at the end of the day, a dude on their side of the fence or their side of the aisle was doing things that were morally reprehensible, which, he's on our fucking side. It's not the greatest thing in the world, but there's other stuff to talk about.
Well, it's also kind of like what our conversation last week was a lot about the culture wars in the United States, and we kind of mentioned that as well. It turned into a lot of different things of us versus them, or you versus me.
That is so fucking dangerous in a democratic society.
I would just...
It's so dangerous.
I would throw this out there before I grab another course. I think
Woo!
the biggest thing...
Of course.
Yeah, Coors Light. Coldest rocks.
Yeah.
This podcast is brought to you by Coors Light.
Yeah. When you see the blue on the can, you know that delicious libation is colder than the mountains of the Rockies.
Yeah. So anyway, I would just pose, right before you get started, Timo, that one of the biggest reasons why we see this is just the rhetoric that we get from Donald Trump. And the rhetoric that we get from immigrants and what he kind of tends to say about immigration, right? He tends to say we're being infested. He's saying things like Mexico's not sending their best, right? He tends to say whatever it is, right? Where people can just so easily take it the wrong way. And he has said a lot of things that are just kind of border on not border on
He's
insulting.
not
Some
a
things
politician,
are,
man.
Yeah, no, some things are very insulting, and then some
Honestly.
things just kind of border on like, what the fuck is your problem, right? And so I think a lot of the rhetoric that Trump spews is one of the main reasons why we can't stomach him subsequently, separating children from their families. So Jameson, I just kind of pose it to you and just kind of spitball from there.
Yeah, hold on. I'm gonna move my dog here because last time I noticed we could really hear his breathing on this podcast almost over our own.
Sounds like a heavyweight man. Just like,
Basically.
the French fries. Those with the gravy. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Would you fuck me? I'd fuck me hard.
Go lay down, Jefferson.
Oh, Mr. Jefferson,
Good boy.
you're such a cheeky fellow.
So, a lot of what you just said, Jerry, I feel like kind of. I had a good response and then I moved my dog here. Lost it.
And a 3, 2, 1.
So kind of a lot of the different things I figured, like your answer was almost in your question. In the fact you talk a lot about how, I guess to circle back around, like why a lot of people weren't angry with Obama, versus why a lot of people are angry with Trump. It's not, not only to deal with the culture wars and things like that in the United States, and the us versus them, but he said it himself. He's not a politician. He says a lot of different things that a lot of people disagree with because he says it so poorly. Versus like Obama, who was very articulate and he was very good at delivering speeches.
Yeah.
And
A handsome, well-spoken
Jefferson,
guy
go lay down.
who could sell fucking ketchup popsicles to a woman in white gloves versus just like, it's all those goddamn Mexicans. That's what's going on. I'm going to build an 800-foot wall. Is that my fucking cheeseburger? I'm starving. Like,
Yeah.
ew.
But I'd also feel like a lot of the stuff that he sees, his attention span, I would say, and to be fair, I don't know him, but I feel like his attention span was also so short that a lot of the times the information that he get was basically kind of like what we were talking about as well versus the social media where you get a couple sentences of information that can sway your whole opinion. We're like, that's a sentence in an entire book of stories type thing. So he based a lot of information on that, and then he'll go off on tangents based on that as well, which I think is why a lot of people are like, well, you're basically just the giving tree of the GOP here, buddy. Like, keep going. And I think a lot of the other things he'll see as well is a lot of the problems that are coming on with, like, immigrants from what's going on in Germany and some of the other European countries that are taking on a lot of different immigrants where they're having a lot of issues. Like, let's say, for example, rape is being really bad in Sweden. They're actually having a lot of violent crimes increasing in France and Germany and things like that as well. And he's just now, I think, turning it towards Mexico and being like, they're sending us our worst, just like Germany's getting the worst of the Syrian refugees type things. You're like, well, yeah, we're getting a lot of criminals that are coming up from
He
there.
knows how to play to his base.
Exactly.
I'll give him credit. He is strumming those
He
strings.
is a master at playing to
He's a
people's
fucking
kind of
salesman. He's a good salesman.
Yeah,
he's
he is
he's pretty
just-
funny stand-up comedian too.
But
Like,
he is, and politicians should take note because he is literally, I don't know, he's one of the best at playing to people's base and just kind of base instincts. And I've never quite seen that. And this is why this election was so interesting. And obviously, I'm not old enough to remember 2000 or the 96 election or anything like that. But this is the first politicians that I've seen that are really, really good at playing to their base, right? And Bernie was really good at this too.
Mm-hmm.
He was able to galvanize an entire crowd and really put up a serious challenge to a machine that is the Clinton foundation.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And he was able to mount a very serious challenge. And these are very, very good politicians, and Trump is the master at that. And that's something we really haven't seen before.
it just to, I guess, interject with something simple. I hope, if nothing else, this brings about a serious societal audit of the current two-party system. I would personally, as a voting, tax-paying American citizen, I would like to see more options. I would really like that because I feel, okay, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, politically, if you were going to give me a political affiliation, that's probably the closest I could give you. I'd be like, you seen South Park recently? Okay. Get back to me in a week. There's another one coming. It's gonna be great. But no, seriously, like, I really hope that this wrecking ball of a human being is going to be the precursor to a reconstructive era of a realignment of American politics. Because I'm an optimist, I really am. I think good can come from just how fucking ridiculous this guy is. I've never like.
He's a reality TV star. Who's to
He
say
is
that
he
now?
is 100% a reality
Yeah.
TV star, and he took ratings work for me.
Yeah.
Why won't ratings work in the field of politics? It's the same logic, and I can see where he's coming from. I don't like him as a person, but I mean the tactics that he's using are extremely effective. I mean,
They
piss
really
people
work.
piss people the fuck off, and they're gonna talk about you.
Yeah.
Or they're gonna love you and idolize you. So I mean, I really hope that we use this as a learning example of. Do you remember? Huh? You remember what it was like?
Anyway, just before we get too off topic, I kind of want to jump on something Jameson said. So you brought up, you were able to just kind of bring up both, you know, Syrian refugees and sort of the economic migrants that were going into Europe and causing a lot of the turmoil that you see in Europe, right? You see the rise of far-right parties, you see the rise of Pegida, especially in the UK and in, you know, a lot of Scandinavian countries.
Sounds like a Dragon Ball Z villain.
Yeah. You see the. Anyway, before we get into that, before we get into the. I think that crisis kind of ties into Trump's Muslim ban.
You're right.
Before we do that, I'd kind of like to get both of your reactions on what's happening. Because we did a lot of the, you know, what about Obama? Right? We said, okay, well, what about Obama was kind of doing the same thing to, you know, migrants. From Mexico, and not just Mexico, but these are migrants coming in from El Salvador. These are migrants coming in from Nicaragua.
Afghanistan, stuff
Right,
like that
but
as well,
but before we do the migrants coming in from the Middle East and Africa, I would kind of like to get both of your responses to what the current administration is treating migrants from, you know, Central America, essentially, right? And so, if you don't know what's going on, just to give you a brief overview. What you have in Central America is a lot of political turmoil, right? El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, these are areas that are either ravaged by political violence or gang violence, right? You have gangs like MS-13, and then you also have, you know, political violence.
Massive cartels, horrible
Exactly.
misinvestment.
So a lot of the people there are emigrating from Central America. They catch a train, essentially, from Mexico, from southern Mexico, all the way up to the American border, right? They get to the border. Some are lucky enough to cross. Others are being stopped and, you know, essentially being turned back, right? And so the Trump administration, when they took office, right, their policy was what we're going to do in order to incentivize people to stop crossing the border, because it is dangerous to cross the border, right? You get, you know, caught up with cartels. You get, you know, caught up in very bad circles, right? You have to pay people thousands of dollars to hopefully transport your family and hopefully not kill you and hopefully not ask you to transport drugs or whatever it is, right? So this is the situation right now, right? You have thousands of people essentially seeking either, you know, for economic reasons or for, you know, political turmoil reasons, trying to get into the United States, right? So, you know, just a brief overview, right? So the Trump administration was trying to separate, you know, in order to de-incentivize people from crossing. They said, okay, well, our policy is going to be, we're going to separate, if you're a family, we're going to separate children from their parents. We're going to, you know, have children over here. We're going to send them into foster care, and the parents are going to be arrested and deported back to the countries. And then from there, the parents can kind of find their children, right? So that's the situation right now. Just engage in your response. You know, what do you think of that policy? Do you think it makes sense, even as immoral as it might be, or do you think there's kind of a workaround to it? So Willie, I guess I'll pose the question to you first.
It's a loaded question.
Yeah,
I'll preface it by
the
saying
Loaded
that.
Potato Podcast.
Yeah. Loaded potato. I can see a T-shirt already. Are you guys ready to get down to loaded potato? Candidly, I mean, I could see why you would want to structure things like that. where you're just like, well, this parent's about to go through a shitstorm of bad experiences as we process them. Let's take the kids aside. The execution is very, very poor. Add to the fact that you're dragging cameras into it. I mean, you have kids in abandoned WalMarts that have been made into makeshift fucking camps, and you have them behind fences. That's just terrible PR. It doesn't look good. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. I mean, economically, if you look at the country, we are trending right around 4% or lower unemployment rates. There are businesses that are falling over backwards trying to hire people. And here we have a lot of potentially able-bodied people that are crossing our borders who are, like you said, economic refugees that are dying to work. And not to mention, they have that immigrant vitality of a first-generation American, potentially, that built this country. I mean, the same conversation was happening in the eastern side of the border of our country about 120 years ago.
With the Irish.
And precisely. You had undesirables. These Catholic motherfuckers were flooding our borders, and they were polluting American Protestants with their presence. And look what happened. They became cops. They became engineers. They became soldiers. There was literally a mechanism in place when this first started happening in the 1860s. And literally the Union was just like, hey, son, you want to get a steady meal and a fancy coat and a gun? Gettysburg! Like, literally, we mechanized those motherfuckers and we used them for our purposes in the American system, which is fucked up in its own conversation, but they became contributing members of the society. How many different genealogical things are floating around in you, Jerry?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I'm a fucking European mutt. I don't even know what I am.
Well,
Sounds
like
American.
20% Jewish.
Yeah, I've got
Yeah.
Would you
So-
say though, like,
Jameson, just real quick,
Okay.
just to bring it in the podcast. To pose the question to you, would you agree with how I posited the question, and then also your response to the Trump administration's treatment of these, whatever you want to call them, migrants, refugees, whatever it is that you want to call them. So how I posited the question, and also just kind of your overview on how the administration is doing on immigration.
as far as the immigration or the administration doing on immigration, let's face it, this is the government. They're terrible with just about everything that they do. I mean, we're talking about the same people that brought you the DMV. I mean,
I've been waiting 4 months to get my driver's license. I shit you not. I luckily found my old wallet, and I just used my old driver's license now.
so it's just, I don't know. They're not doing the best job as far as a vetting process and trying to get people sorted and figured out and basically get them acclimated to a way that they can live in the United States. I would love to see them do so much better on that. How? I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there smarter than me that could figure out some really, really good, cost-effective ways to get these people into the United States and essentially have them start working. But we've also made the process just so hard for them to even get a work visa. So to have them start being contributing members of society so that they can actually be paying their taxes and buying, goods and services and contributing to the economy, the government has also just made that so difficult for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think any administration, whether it be the Trump administration, the Obama administration, the Bush administration, has done well as far as that aspect goes.
Do you remember our old conversation about this? It's several years ago, Jameson and I were having a similar conversation on immigrants, and I'm just like, I got a pretty simple policy.
Yeah.
I'm just like,
$250, you're a citizen.
$250.
Yeah.
That's all I need. Just
But-
give me $250.
You could sell your citizenship.
No,
I'm
you
literally
could
just
become an American citizen for $250.
Oh, really?
Now
I'm
here's
just
I
like-
heard a radical idea that was like, I could sell my citizenship to anybody. The highest
yeah,
bidder.
probably.
No, I don't want to be an expat.
Yeah.
I like it here in America. I'm a tall, educated white
But
man. I've got the
it's-
world on a string.
But basically, to bring it back around, like, I can't blame, people from Mexico, from El Salvador, or anything like that, from trying to come to the United States because, I'll admit it, I am very, very lucky to be born in the United States and
Fuck
to be
yeah.
like third or fourth generation being in the United States, and it's just, I would like to definitely see there be a much easier process for them to come to the United States, but I also understand to an extent the big issue that they're having with, like, okay, we don't want people from MS-13, or we don't want the cartel, or we don't want murderers, rapists, anything like that coming into the United States just to go ahead and commit more crimes here in the United States. And So I understand that thought process behind things, and I would definitely, like I said, love to see there be some way where they can vet people a little bit better. But I'm never going to blame a parent for trying to bring their child into the United States to try to give them a better life, because growing up in Mexico City, I'm sure must be just terrible to an extent. You know, air quality is bad. There's crime rates are just terrible there. You know, you'd want them to obviously get the best education, the best food, the best job opportunities going forward. And even as a parent, like, I'm not a parent per se, but if I were a parent, I would hate to be separated from my child. But if I know that that child now has the best option to live in the United States and get, like I said, all those different things, good, you know, healthcare, good education, good food, even good clean drinking water,
Yeah.
I would definitely want to give them that opportunity, and I would take any risk that would be to essentially give them that opportunity. Yeah, granted, my opportunities at this point probably fucked,
Yeah.
but going forward, you know, I would like to try to at least give my kids that
So,
opportunity.
so how do you see the Trump administration's policy of separating children and families at the border, or children and their parents at the border?
Obviously, I would never want to separate a family, because I'm very close with my family, and if I were separated from my parents growing up, it would have been extremely traumatic. So, like I said, if there was some way that I could see them making it a much safer much safer, essentially,
How about less invasive?
solution. Yes, but less invasive. I don't know, maybe less invasive, but I mean, look at adopting a child, for example. That is one of the most invasive things you can do, and yet some
Which is-
two
but-
hard, hold
which is
on,
ins-
hold on, sorry. So, you know, two hillbillies down south, they can breed and have 10 different kids.
Because I made them.
Exactly, when, you know, different families out there who are willing to give those kids a really good life, and they're trying to adopt, they're like, okay, that's going to be $10,000, and now we're going to go into every detail of your life with the FBI, and they're going to be conducting research and all this stuff. So I don't know if necessarily having something that's less, I don't know, I don't know, but I would like to see some progress made as far as being able to have the families stay together, get a work visa, acclimate to living in the United States, you know, even if that means, and it sounds terrible because everyone's going to be like, why don't you learn Spanish? But I would say even having them learn English, and I would say, a lot of people say, well, English isn't the official language of the United States. Well, our Constitution is written in English, so I would argue that it probably is. So I'd like to see that we essentially have one language and everybody learn it, or, you know, heck, if I need to become bilingual, I guess I need to become bilingual, but I don't know. That's just kind of how I'd like to see things
Yeah, I
progress.
think that's kind of pushing it a little bit more
Yeah,
into
that's-
the assimilation argument.
Agreed.
What I was trying to really nail down both of your opinions was the Trump administration's policy of separating children from families, which I think is immoral, but I
Agreed.
understand the reasoning behind it. You're trying to de-incentivize people from crossing the border, right? So a few shitty stories is something that the Trump administration can swallow, even though it's bad PR, even though you have the 2018, you know, midterm elections coming up, right? It's bad PR, but at the same time, you know what? It's a loss that you can handle. It's a loss that you can take if you're strategizing, right? If I'm looking long term and I'm a Republican strategist, right? I can say, okay, look, because people are already doing it, right? We don't have the information, but I guarantee you, a lot of people who could have potentially crossed the border and they have 2 little children, and they go, nope, fuck that, I'm not crossing the border, I'm staying in Mexico, or, you know, I'm going south, something like that, right? It's already happening, and we haven't heard it, right? It's a story that we haven't heard
Dude,
yet.
I think we're looking at the wrong things. I really, really do. We have an obligation as a country to look at the ripple effect that we have as far as our influence and how we export it to the rest of the world. The reason Mexico is so fucked up, largely, I'm sure there's other issues, corruption, whatever, drugs. We consume so many drugs in this country.
Right, but Mexico is a pretty well-off country, right? Net immigration from Mexico is 0. It's negative, right?
It's way down, yeah.
We're
People-
losing more people to Mexico than we're actually directly Mexicans, right? Mexico,
I
the
did not
biggest,
know that.
and I
Bar's been
don't,
shifting.
yeah, and I don't want to talk too much because I think we can delve into a very interesting topic that's more, you know, relevant, which is the Trump travel ban.
Mhm.
But just real quick on your point,
Mexico is a huge economy. I think it's the 11th biggest economy in the world, right? And we can also tie this into Trump's economic policies too. But the drug wars have kind of reshaped Mexico's kind of political thing, but it doesn't play the biggest influence that we would like it, or I guess that we would kind of think it would play, right? Mexico's problem is that it's been an autocracy for 70 years, essentially, right? Since 1920s, when it's called the PRI-party. I forget the actual what the acronym stands for, but essentially it's been an autocracy.
One party has ruled it
One
for
party
two
ruled
generations.
for 70 years, so, multiple generations, right? So that's been Mexico's problem. But anyway, Mexico is a big economy. People aren't leaving the way that they were in mass, the way that you see from Honduras or El Salvador, which is just south, right? Guatemala,
Sure.
right? So anyway, that's the migration. That's the immigration thing, right? And to keep it in the immigration circle, right? Now what we have relevant, or just about a week ago, was the Supreme Court ruled, I think it was 5-4,
Yeah, 5-4.
to uphold Trump's travel ban, right? And if you don't know about Trump's travel ban, Trump initially put out a travel ban on predominantly Muslim countries, right? Because he said we have a problem from Muslim countries, they're coming in and we don't know how to properly vet them, and we don't know if we're letting in terrorists, right? So it was modulated in whatever way. He added some countries that weren't predominantly Muslim countries. He added North Korea, he added Venezuela, he added
Venezuela made the list.
Venezuela made the list.
Interesting.
So that was the
Venezuela
second.
as a whole.
Yeah, so that was the second iteration, and then the third iteration, I don't know how much changed, but anyway, there was about 7 countries, a few predominantly Muslim, and then like 1 or 2 that were, communist, in Venezuela and North Korea, that made the list. Anyway, the Supreme Court ruled that yes, we're not going to ban the Trump travel ban, strictly based on the notion that the presidency, the executive office, has the power to declare what is in America's national security interest, right? So that was their ruling. That's how the majority kind of opinionated. So this brings us it ties it into the immigration thing, but it also ties it into the Trump travel ban, right? So just kind of to posit a question, I guess, to Jameson is, what do you think? How would you kind of respond to Trump's travel ban? Do you think and I kind of hate the word, but do you think it has a tinge of anti-Muslim bigotry, or do you think it's a reasonable response to what is happening, especially with Islam and its particular place in the world today?
Big problem, and this is where I'm going to have an opinion that's probably going to offend a lot of different people.
Shoot.
But I feel like, to an extent, it was the right choice. Like, I understand why the Supreme Court voted the way they did. According to the Immigration National Act or whatever like that section 212F or whatever,
Yeah.
basically says, like, the president has the final say when it comes down to who has the authority to say who can enter the country and who cannot. So I think that's why they ruled in favor of it. But what I've seen so far is that there is a lot of different Muslim countries that are on that list that do have a lot of different issues with the United States. Their support of Israel, the basic fact, that there's so much of our troops in their different countries and stuff like that they're so upset about. There's so many different things that give them reasons to dislike the United States. Not only that, when you look at the religious aspect of different things, we're infidels. And there are a lot of people that in that culture are very extreme, and they do want to harm United States citizens. So I understand the thought process behind that. So I guess my biggest thing would say is, it sounds, just to sum it up basically, I agree with it, but I would like to get anybody that's trying to escape Sharia law, which I think is the biggest issue with a lot of those countries that have that ban on there. Anybody who's willing to escape Sharia law because they don't want to practice Sharia law, I do sympathize for, and I would like them to come to the United States to practice a peaceful religion aspect of things. But like I said, so many of them just seem to have that issue with the United States.
Yeah, that one's tough. I mean, I do see the argument. I mean, we've been very militarily active there, and there has been a lot of anti-American sentiment there for a very long time. And there have been a lot of malefactors that have been exported from those countries into a lot of the EU that have just not done a good job as far as assimilating into those cultures,
Yes.
being productive members of society. Quite the opposite, in fact. So I regret to say that I see where they're coming from.
Yeah, and I guess to sum it up, the way I was saying, like with the president having that authority, I understand that's why the Supreme Court ruled in the way that they did.
They followed the letter of the law
They
from the
did.
sounds of it.
And then if so many people are upset with the fact that that's the way the Supreme Court ruled, I would then argue to Congress saying, like, you guys essentially passed that act. Why don't you go ahead and look at changing that act if you were so upset about it? So that way, essentially, it once again puts the hands or the power in the hands of essentially Congress or the Senate or something like that, and not just one particular person, so that so much negativity or anger or anything like that is directed at the presidency, and it could be directed at our Congress or our Senate or something like that.
Yeah.
So anyway, Jameson, I think your response was good, but it was very condensed, and I would like to flesh it out a little bit.
Okay.
So, and Willie, you being the lefty on the show a little bit, right? I would kind of like to get your response to Jameson's answer. So essentially, Trump's travel ban was meant as a response to all of the Islamic terrorism that we see, and not just Islamic terrorism, but also the response that we see when you get people that went to Syria and fought for the Islamic State. And essentially, when they're coming back from their visas, they go to Pakistan, and then they say, "I went to Istanbul, and then I'm coming back to the United States because I was just a student." Right? These people, for all intents and purposes, were members of the Islamic State, right? And they fought to establish a caliphate worldwide, right?
Are you talking American citizens who use student
American
visas to
citizens,
travel to them?
Canadian citizens, all these type of people went ostensibly to Pakistan to study as students, but they realistically went to Syria and were fighting for the Islamic State.
And that's tangible.
That's
We can prove that.
very real stories. There's a very good podcast called Caliphate by Rukmini Kalimashi. Right, she's a reporter for the New York Times. She just came out with this podcast, and she was studying there. She was interviewing one of these fighters. Anyway, so I think Trump's travel ban was meant as a retaliatory response to saying, look, we have Islamic fighters and people that were fighting either for the caliphate or were fighting for their own jihad coming back into the United States, and we can't allow it. Right? We just had the San Bernardino shooting. We just had the Brussels explosion. We had Ariana Grande in Manchester. Right? We had all these attacks. And what we didn't want was somebody coming in that had just fought for the caliphate, blowing up the Great Mall in Minneapolis, right? So Jameson, I think your response was kind of tied into all of that and what Islam means and what why
Vague
Trump.
is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, it was. I would like to flesh it out because I think you have a lot of points in there, but I would like to just kind of see it just a little more sort of
Nuanced.
Yeah, nuanced. So Willie, just kind of just your quick responses to what you think. So just I guess a twofold question, really fast, right? What you think Trump's travel ban means, and is it moral? Is it moral for us? Because people in Syria are suffering. You have Bashar al-Assad, who is genuinely committing genocide against Syrian people, and so do we have an obligation towards Syrian people to let them in? And so I would just kind of like to gauge your response to Trump's travel ban there. Is it immoral, or are we doing the right thing?
Well, I really think you have to see where. I guess it's a loaded question.
Just respond. We gotta stop saying it's a loaded question. These are all going to be loaded questions.
How much responsibility for the world do we have?
That's a great question.
That is, I think, the most genuine answer.
Yeah.
Because in so many situations, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. We have been the big swinging cock in the world since the end of World War II. Fact. And our influence, our opinions, our might is it's the world over. It is. There is a terrible burden and responsibility associated with it. Personally, I think we're kind of sliding back a bit, and I don't necessarily see that as a terribly bad thing, because there's only so long that this country can operate as a world police system. So I mean, just how many topics can a country fucking tackle when there's so many domestic issues that are going on? I mean, it'd be like if you were a single mom and you had 4 fucking children and your neighbor thought you were a dickhead because you couldn't babysit their 2 children. It's just like, dude, seriously, my hands are absolutely full. I'm overwhelmed. I'm pissing away money. My deficit is growing. I can barely keep the lights on.
But it's less that your neighbor can't take care of the children. It's more that your neighbor has a machete and is constantly threatening you with cutting your head off, or is constantly threatening to cut the power off. Right?
Yeah.
That's the problem that or the United States is dealing with.
Sure,
Right?
sure. I'll put it simply. I agree with what the Supreme Court did. I think it was extremely divisive. I think it's a difficult decision to make. I think it's an extremely unpopular decision to make. But ultimately, you are looking at specific countries that are fucked in so many ways of saying it. They're in a rough situation. Why in the fuck would you want to open up a main vein into the American system and allow millions of people to pour in, and you have no way to thoroughly vet them?
So you don't think we have an obligation to Syrian refugees?
I mean, we have I think it depends upon perspective. We have an obligation.
So
to the
here's
world.
the perspective, right? You have Syrian refugees who are being murdered by Bashar al-Assad and
Sure.
Vladimir Putin, and a lot of the Iranian proxies, right? You essentially have dozens of Shiite militias operating in Syria and murdering civilians, right? But predominantly what you have is Bashar al-Assad and Vladimir Putin, cluster bombing, whatever name, insert village here
Sure.
that Gary Johnson can't name, right? Aleppo, right? Right? So and we, as a country, Obama decided to not intervene, right? He decided that the red line didn't mean shit to him.
Well, he didn't want to
So-
escalate tensions there and
Right.
embroil us in another war that we couldn't afford.
Exactly. So what is our responsibility here, right? What is our responsibility to Syrian refugees who are legitimately just seeking asylum, right? Jordan won't take them in. Lebanon won't take them in. Saudi Arabia won't take them in. Europe is, for all intents and purposes, filled to the brim, right? What do we have?
Okay, so I don't know a ton about the subject. I
Right,
really don't.
So here's the overview, right?
Yeah, and I'm hearing
Syria-
you, but my question is, Europe is filled to the brim, as you said, right?
Yeah.
How are they handling that quota right now? What are the side effects? What are they seeing?
They're not handling it well.
Okay.
What you have in every major democratic ally that we know of, right? So for example, the whole Yugoslav area, right? Kosovo, Serbia, I forget all the countries. Anyway, they've shut down. Macedonia shut down. Greece shut down. Spain barely took in some refugees from Libya, and it was this big, show. Italy turned far right, and they said no more refugees. Germany almost lost Angela Merkel as the Democratic Socialist. You gave rise to a very far right party strictly because they let in too many refugees, essentially, and you had the return of a Nazi party. Sweden is essentially, a lot of the public thinks that they're inundated with Muslims. You have predominantly Jewish neighborhoods called no-go zones. The UK Brexit immigration was a big reason why the UK left the European Union. France. You have France.
They wanted to use their channel, so to speak, and be like,
Yeah,
no,
France.
we're good.
The best example of France is the Paris attacks, 2015. Right, 143 people died because they let in too many refugees. I think 6 of the 15 attackers were Syrian refugees. So this is how Europe is handling it, right? Europe is handling it because they're dealing with terrorist attacks.
Mhm.
They're dealing with the rise of far-right parties. They're dealing with, essentially shutting down their borders.
So it's fair to say that the inundation of this element into any of these countries has been negative.
Very negative. And so that's why I would pose the question to you is, what is America's role in taking in these refugees, right?
I would say what supersedes that preservation of
This is strictly a moral question, saying people are suffering and people are dying, but you have a very idiosyncratic problem to predominantly Muslim countries, right?
sure.
Islam poses a problem that me and Jameson, I think, are very well versed to talk about.
Doesn't play well with others.
Islam poses a very unique problem with its focus on jihad. But anyway, what I would pose to you is, before we get into kind of like that whole messy subject, is how do you view America's role as, how does it deal with refugees? How does it deal with Syrian refugees who are dying and are being slaughtered? It's a very it's kind of simple, but it's a tough question to answer, right? Because
Well, based on the information that you've given me, we come first. As shitty as that is, I'm always going to use a neighbor metaphor
yeah,
because that's how I think.
yeah, no, and it's a
It
great way to
fucking
put
sucks
a thought experiment
that
yeah.
you are having an issue keeping the lights on, that you are having a terrible home life and situation, but at the end of the day, if it means detrimentally affecting me, my life, sorry, bro.
Yeah,
I really don't know how else to put it. We are watching numerous countries, according to the input that you've given me, that are buckling under the pressure of these people coming in. It seems logical that you don't let them into your party.
yeah, and that's exactly what Trump did, right? And this ties it all perfectly into Trump's travel ban. Is Trump was saying, look how these other countries are responding. These other countries, you have the Paris attacks, you have the Brussels attacks, you have the Manchester bombings, right? You have attack after you have Charlie Hebdo, most famously, right? You have attack after attack, where you have whatever number it is, right? It's a number that's too high. Even if it's 3 people, right? You had San Bernardino, California.
That was terrible.
Right? If you even if the number is 1, that's too many people to die. For example, I don't want to die because I'm out in Old Town Fort Collins and some crazy person says Allahu Akbar, shoots me, and I find out, or my family finds out that they were some, Syrian refugee, right? And they were like, oh, well, we couldn't properly vet him, but, we let in 20 of his family, and this is the only guy who was jihadist, right? I don't want to die just because we let in this person. And that seems like a totally plausible response to the whole crisis. And so, Jameson, I would kind of like to pose the question to you, is that, in order to kind of flesh out your answer, because you did have a lot of kind of points that, were just kind of like, I think you had a lot of very large points, but I would kind of like to hear you kind of flesh out your ideas a bit, is what do you think? So I think Trump's travel ban directly ties in, even though Trump might not know the differences in Islam. What do you think? How do you think Islam poses a very unique challenge to the travel ban? What are kind of the problems that Islam has, and then in order to properly vet refugees?
The biggest problem, I guess, is that the assimilation process. Like, I am all for the First Amendment where it says you have the freedom of religion. But at that point, you have to respect my religion, or you have to respect my beliefs. I'm not going to sit there and go ahead and just say, like, okay, all right, Sharia law, or, oh, hey, Islam's the coolest, let's do this, go ahead and fuck everything else out there. You have to be able to respect what I believe.
You have to tolerate the asshole across the street who's just like, fuck your God.
Basically,
Exactly.
and the problem I have is that they don't, and I'm being very generic when I say
Yeah.
they, because I know that there are a lot of Muslims who would love to come to the United States, practice their religion in peace, and never want to make a peep about it. And you know what, at that point, more power to you, but it's the fact that you were not willing to assimilate, and you're not willing to respect exactly what
Yeah.
I want to believe. I want to live my life in peace. I want to be able to drive down to Old Town and drink a beer and not be looked at you and or not look at you and be judged. You know.
So for every
Or you,
1,000,
or you can judge me. I don't. Assimilate, I think, can be a loaded word. Tolerate. This is a country of tolerance. There are people that I look at that are fucking morons, and they're everywhere. But I tolerate their existence. I'm not going to be like, I don't like the way that you live, 450-pound man who is making his 15th trip to McDonald's, day 4 of the week. But despite the fact that you are a miserable burden upon the American health system, I'm not going to murder you.
Well, I mean, does that
Feel
kind of
free to eat your
answer what you're
cheeseburger.
talking about?
yeah.
Because
So just quickly, I don't know how much time we're at, but
I don't know, but we keep going.
55 minutes, is
Yeah.
my guess.
do you guys have a time limit? I don't know.
No,
Are
I'm
you
free
guys-
all night, man.
I'm chilling, man.
Cool. All right, so that was exactly the answer I was looking for. So Jameson, what do you think is our responsibility to Syrian refugees?
When did we become? When did it become our responsibility? So
But it's not just that, right? It's not just it. I think it's unfair to look at it as your responsibility. I think so. For example, to use Willie's neighbor example, right? If your neighbor, right, let's say right next door, right, you have a woman and a man, and they're every night you just hear the woman go bam, bam, and everyone she's like, please stop. Would you just go, well, I love just sitting here watching my TV, but when did it become my responsibility to stop hearing this woman just... So I think you can kind of use that example. It's a rough example, but I think you could kind of use that example. All right, so even if it's not your responsibility, right? And I know every argument. I know every argument that says, well, we got involved in the Middle East here, and we got involved in the 1920s, and every example I know, right? I know every story.
sure.
But I think just right now, there's a moral imperative to help Syrian refugees.
Okay.
And because I think Bashar al-Assad is committing a genuine genocide. I think genocide is actually happening. And we are signatories to...
Sorry, we'll just you can edit this part
Edit.
out. Yeah.
We are signatories to the Genocide Convention, right? We are, as a country, we decided to stop genocide in its tracks whenever we found it. Bill Clinton famously, infamously said, I'm going to stop... This is a good place to stop right here.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back to Loaded Potato. Mr. Jameson McMillan and Geraldo, help me.
Gerardo
Geraldo?
Gonzalez.
See. Jerry.
So Jerry, where did we leave off?
We left off right as you were positing, or you were kind of giving your response to the unique problem that Islam poses to why we can't let in Syrian refugees, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked you, you asked, why is it our responsibility? And I said, well, it's our responsibility even though we don't have, even though we have the entire history that we have in the Middle East,
Right.
right? Do we still have, even if we were just, Canada or whatever it was, right? Do we still have a moral imperative to respond to the crisis that's going on?
And I was thinking about it, something that we were talking about earlier, like a possible subject that we could do later. I was thinking a lot about the different views I had on that, and I'll leave that for later, but I would be a hypocrite if I was to all of a sudden start saying, you know what, no, we don't have a moral responsibility. Because at the end of the day, we need to do whatever we can to help those in need. Because, like we talked about last week, a lot of those people didn't choose, or we didn't choose to have a lot of the different features and genetics and things like that that we had. I didn't choose to be born in the United States, just like I'm sure they did not choose to be born in Syria. So at the end of the day, yes, I think it is a bit of a moral responsibility for us to be able to help them, because they do have the same rights I do as far as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So the
It's
problem
not very neoconservative here.
yeah. So at the end of the day, I mean, I don't want them to go ahead and be like, yes, now I'm in America. Just kidding. You now have to believe what I have to believe. Kind of like what I was saying earlier. Because I don't want that forced upon me. I don't want all of a sudden your problems to become my problems now that you're in the United States. We did our job getting you here. Make your own life.
Mm-hmm.
So Willie, how do you view Trump's rhetoric with Muslims, and now his implementation of the, for all intents and purposes, it's a Muslim ban?
It's a Muslim ban.
How would you view that? Is it sound political strategy for his base, or is it immoral? Is it immoral just sans politics? How would you kind of respond to that, right?
Politically speaking, I think he made a good move. Honestly, I mean, that's a very denigrated and unpopular group that his base, for the most part, doesn't particularly care for. The news agency that follows him around like the fart catchers that they are all in favor of it, and they're chirping out their praises behind it.
Do you think his base is just blindly following him, or do you think they have
Largely.
a point?
Largely.
Do you think there's a point to the Muslim ban? Do you think there's a point to Trump?
Yes, I think there is a definitive point. And the point is you have malefactors that have been flooding out of this area that is in turmoil, that has been in turmoil, and they've been splashing into different countries, right? And countries have been taking them in uncertain numbers depending on where you talked about. You talked about Italy having a far-right movement. Basically, think of an allergen, right? Cottonwood, wonderful example. It introduces itself into a system, and for some places it might be inert. But what you've seen in this specific example is that people are flooding out of this area, landing in different parts of the world, and pissing people the fuck off to the point where they're galvanizing, they're radicalizing, and you're getting a terrible, terrible backlash. You mentioned earlier Angela Merkel, Chancellor?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Chancellor of Germany. She was almost ousted very recently, just a few short months ago, as you said, to a far-right movement, which harkens back to 2 short generations ago when fascism and Nazism took over their entire fucking country. That's there. The seedy underbelly and dangerous element of any country is always there, just teeming under the surface, and all it needs is a trigger.
And this might push us into culture war stuff.
Sure.
But how close do you think that is in American politics? Do you think we're on the
It's there, man. Are you
No.
fucking kidding me?
Right. No, and
Yes.
I'm not.
Okay,
but,
please.
But do you think there's kind of a seediness of fascism in American politics?
Yes.
Do you think we're on the verge, like, it just takes the right sort of populace, it just takes the right sort of, just
Stimulus.
the right person and the right conditions to just quickly fall into, and I don't like the word fascism because I think it has very.
How about extremism?
Yeah, just kind of
Radicalism.
authoritarianism, right?
Sure.
Just sort of, all right, and let's just use with the understanding that fascism. All right, we're using it very loosely, but let's say, all right,
Sure.
we'll fall into fascism.
How
Do
about
you
we
think-
say, how about
Let's just call it fascism.
an undesirable situation occurs?
Yeah,
right?
but no, let's just call it fascism
Sure.
because, with all intents and purposes, right, we're not quite talking about the very specific.
Within this
terms of-
isolated case study,
Yeah,
we're
exactly.
using that terminology to label it.
So for example, do you think that the American politics could very quickly decay into fascism?
Quickly, no, because
No,
the
but-
Americans.
yeah, not quickly, but like, you think that with the right, if you turn the dials just very correctly, right? You have a very popular speaker. You have, the what was it? The
So-
Bushnell fires.
So,
right?
from what I'm hearing from you, you're asking me if certain elements are introduced into the ecosystem that is American politics,
Exactly.
is there the possibility of some of the uglier
Fascism.
side of the world, fascism, for example, rearing its head?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Into American politics.
Yes,
Yeah.
I see that.
And do you think that the government could not quickly is a bad word, but do you think that it could eventually just kind of collapse into
Quickly, no. Quickly is the wrong
Yeah,
word.
yeah, exactly.
Quickly, in my opinion, is the wrong way to describe it. American politics, the American system, our Constitution, and American democracy has existed for so long because it is so slow. Because typically, the bureaucratic wheels and the areas in which it sticks and slows things down and prevents laws from passing and amendments from occurring is so fucking slow that it loses momentum. Do you want a really good example of this, actually? And I think it's pretty fascinating. The temperance movement of America. Temperance movement in the United States first started probably in the 1830s and 1840s, along with American revivalism, right? So you had this massive push of reawakening, a great awakening of American religion. So basically, sidled alongside of that was this abhorrence and reaction to a drunkard movement within the country. Basically, you had people for the first time getting access to rum and whiskey and distilled spirits as opposed to low ABV beers with their day-to-day life, because let's face it, this was a largely agrarian society. So you had this movement of temperance come into being, and over the course of, let's say, 100 years, up until the Volstead Act being passed, did you know that in the 19-teens in this country, one of the biggest and most powerful political parties was the Ku Klux Klan? Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest reasons that they were one of the biggest and most powerful parties is because they sided with temperance. They were against whiskey, they were against spirits, they were against alcohol, mostly because they viewed it as a trapping of the immigrants or the unpure blood. So that right there is a perfect example of an ecosystem where something atypical is introduced and it brings to life something that has always been there but suddenly is popular.
So do you view that as a failing of democracy? Do you view that?
I view it as a failing of the human condition.
Right, and so, but yeah, that's what democracy is. Democracy is the human condition, right?
Yes.
We're just at the whims of whatever is popular at the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we don't quite understand the blowback. So I fully agree with your point that American democracy is slow because it was designed to be slow.
Checks and balances.
Exactly.
The checks and balances have kept this alive longer than any other fucking sample study that we have, purely because it is overtly bureaucratic and slow.
So I would pose the question to you, right, just to tie it into Trump's Muslim ban, right, and the fascism undercurrencies here is do you see a way forward for America to fall into autocracy, right? Do you see a way forward where, and this is not a far example, right? This happened in Turkey. Turkey was, for all intents and purposes, a democracy, but due to its democratic tendencies, it fell under the auspices of Erdogan, right? And it is now a majority Islamic party, right? It's a one-party rule, and it's now an Islamist country, where before it was a democratic country, right? So do you see where people would rather choose, for example, let's say Trump runs for office again and again and again and again, right? Do you see where the Republican Party would choose autocracy over democracy?
No.
Do you see
That
do
I
you see
don't
that
see.
tendency?
That I don't see.
You don't see that?
There's been too many examples in the past that have limited or augmented some of the more dangerous elements that could have allowed us to run away with things. The only president in the history of the United States that exceeded 2 terms, which was the unofficial standard set by George Washington, exactly, was FDR. Radical circumstances, there was no specific laws written to prevent him from doing it, so more power to him. The guy ruled for 14 and a half years, he did a great job. He did a very good job.
Yeah.
Come on, man.
But
A side topic. I personally think he did a phenomenal job given the shit stack that he was handed.
Fair.
But immediately afterwards, we imposed a law that said, hey, you know what? If it was good enough for Washington, it was good enough for us. 2 terms.
So Jameson, I pose this question to you now, right? You are right of center, you vote Republican. How do you see the Republican Party, Trump, let's say Trump is saying all the right things, right? Trump is, hey, I want, whatever it is that is galvanizing the Republican Party, right? And you're saying, wow, this guy's really saying the right things. Hey, maybe we do stretch out the term limits, right? Maybe we do, maybe we do keep him for, 10, 12 years, right?
He won't live that long.
Right, but all right, Donald Trump Jr., right? But where do you draw the line, right? Because so this brings us back a little bit earlier where Bill Maher was, right? This is one of the trusted liberals, right?
Right.
Bill Maher is somebody where I disagree with him on this point, but he says that Trump is a cult of personality, and he says that Trump is going to rule as long as he wants to rule, right? So how do you see the Republican Party, kind of just reeling in Trump and just saying, you know what? No, we're a party of principles, and we're not going to just fall into these autocratic tendencies, no matter how popular what he's saying is.
It's hard to say because I feel like so many different times over the last few years, Republicans have come, well, maybe not Republicans per se, but maybe more libertarians like Ron Paul and Rand Paul have come to the Senate floor and said, hey, as far as the Senate or as far as the House goes, why don't we go ahead and still make it 2 terms or 3 terms? And then they're like, oh, no, we're not going to do that. But I think since it's already written into law that presidency can only be limited to 2 terms, that I feel like a lot of different parties, both the Democratic and the Republican Party, and I even think that some aspects of the Libertarian Party would respect that fact because it is a law. And I could see, honestly, at that point that if, for whatever reason, Donald Trump comes in and he's like, hey, guys, I know I'm on year number 6 of my presidency. Why don't we go ahead and just make this a dynasty, and Ivanka's going to be taken over once I'm done, or Donald Trump Jr. is going to be taken over once I'm done, that we could all of a sudden see every single branch, legislative branch, judicial branch being like, whoa, not going to happen. And I could honestly see at that point both parties uniting, being like, okay, Republicans might be like, Donald, you're doing a great job, but, this time we're going to be siding with the Democrats on this and saying, like, getting out of line here.
I really don't see American politics denigrating to the point where they bring in a dynastic fucking party.
Yeah, because Americans hate dynasties. But anyway, so here's the good question to pose it to the both of you, is where do you see the autocratic tendencies in American politics, right? I think it's very easy for me to see it in the left, but maybe to you, where do you see it in the right? And maybe to you, where do you see it in the left?
Christianity.
Right? Well, yeah, exactly. So you can see it in the right, but since you're a little more left of center, where do you see it in the left? Where do you see the autocratic tendencies?
Progressive
in the left?
movement.
I was going to say Kennedys.
Right, so...
But, yeah.
All right,
What's that? What did you say?
I was going to say the Kennedys, but that's a good...
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Right,
I honestly think...
flesh out your answer a little bit.
Sure,
Where
let me
do you
flesh
see
it out.
it?
Let me make this crystal fucking
Yeah, where you see it on the left and then where you see it on the right.
I think this sensationalized sport or game of attention-seeking victimization or self-victimization. I am this, you are that. Fuck you, you're an oppressor. I am this, you're somehow attacking my character. There is this really odd system of it's like perpetual self-pity. It's the oddest goddamn thing where these people are like they're going out of their way to have this beacon of light shown upon them, be like, look at how attacked I am, and look at how selfless and amazing I am, and look at these fucking turds in a dress that are telling me that I can't do blah 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 and blah blah blah. That's what bothers me. That's the reason I'm a hardcore, staunch independent, where I'm just like, I don't want to be associated with you fucking assholes or you fucking
see that
assholes.
as a problem predominantly on the left, where they're playing identity politics and they're saying, I am a black lesbian, whatever it is.
Slap a buzzword on me. I'm
right,
that.
exactly.
Yes.
I'm this, and because my identity isn't in mainstream America, I have a voice, and you're shutting down my voice.
Or even
because you're
further
a
than
white
that,
male.
it's like exactly like you are this, so you shouldn't even have an opinion right now.
Yeah.
It's like, why are you even trying to correct me, man? You're a
just name
So
it.
Whatever
there-
I think you might be.
So what's
So
the,
fuck yourself.
So what's the reductio ad absurdum about that? Like what? Okay, let's say these people are in power, and what do they? What is the worst possible outcome here? Like what?
The utter and complete gutting of freedom of expression. And that right there, if freedom of expression and freedom of the press goes in this country, so goes democracy.
So you're saying that if these people, right? If you're calling, right? If you say, "Oh, you're a man," but you say, "Oh no, I'm actually a woman," or whatever it is, right?
That could
That's
be a
the
thread.
worst.
That could be a threat potentially.
So that's the autocratic tendencies.
So I think the autocratic tendencies in all of us is to say, I live my life. This is the life that I live. He lives his life. I don't like the way he lives his life. So I am going
Because
to
of
go
the
in.
first
Exactly. How do I feel about the way he is living his life? No, I have to put a thumb on his shoulder and I have to make sure he's right there so that he's acting just in a particular way that I feel comfortable with the way he participates with the world.
So
That
how
is
does this?
fucked
So
up.
how does this culminate? How does this propagate itself in American politics? Right? Is Bernie Sanders a good example of this, or is there something else? Like, do you see something kind of just percolating
what-
in
what-
America? Do you see there before you respond?
Sure.
Right? Do you see something kind of percolating amongst the American left where you're like, wow, this is a legitimate problem? And so, for example, right, I see this as a legitimate problem in movements like Black Lives Matter. Right, this is a legitimate force in American politics that was able to galvanize an entire political, population and say black people are being attacked by cops, and we need to do everything that we can to stop this. Right, and this has gone all the way up to the presidency, where Trump is tweeting about Colin Kaepernick. So I see this as a legitimate problem. So I would pose a question to you: how do you see this sort of rampant identity politics, and what we could really just sort of narrow down to authoritarianism? Where do you see it just kind of producing its worst self in American politics? Like, where do you see it as just kind of like, oh my God, if this really took root, this could just be very bad for us.
It goes back to the policing mechanisms that we have in place in this country. The autocratic tendencies that you keep alluding back to, they are constantly being checked by you saying something ridiculous, hypothetically, and being like, you're a fucking asshole. I can say that. I have a right to say that. And you can get as sensationalized and ridiculous as you want to, but somebody on the other side of the fence can essentially say, like, dude, what you're saying is bananas. I don't agree with it. It is fundamentally stupid, and I'm going to make fun of you. Me and my friends are. It's going to be awesome. That right there is one of the best shields against extremism, because right there, it's still a game of volleyball. The ball's still going back and forth. That is extremely important. There is always going to be that element that just does not play with others. But so long as the institutions are in place to allow the fucking game to occur, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, instead of fuck you, you can't say that ever again, no, that's when it gets dangerous. Because then you don't have any dissenting opinion. So I've formed this chamber, this protected space where I can allow my ideas to manifest into fucking ludicrous directions and get no checks from reality, no environmental punches that say, hey, this is dangerous, or hey, you are acting like a fucking fool, or hey, you're misappropriating funds. That's when it becomes problematic. So long as the ability to argue and dissent from one another is there, we'll be okay.
So yeah, definitely. And so yeah, I think we'd all agree there. So Jameson, I would pose a question to you, right? Willie just posed that we have this free speech and we have, right, the freedom, I think fundamentally the freedom of press.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so as somebody that's right of center, right, and I don't want to pigeonhole you too much, but like I think you would be a good, very intellectual representative of this. Like, how would you respond to somebody like Donald Trump saying the press is the enemy of the state? Right? How would you say that somebody, like a fundamental right as the press, and saying we're here to present our ideas no matter what, and Trump saying CNN is fake news, or New York Times is fake news, right? How would you kind of respond to that and say, well, the press, no matter how fucked up they are, right, is still, we still should be able to say how much we want to say, right? So I kind of would pose that question to you is, what do you think about Trump's attack on the press, right? And saying it's a fundamental right, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it is a fundamental right. Whether or not somebody writes an article that you agree with, I could go out there tomorrow and start Jameson's Post or whatever like that, and I could write the most hard-hitting, most aggressive articles, whatever, against Donald Trump, and just
Would you grab me a barley pop?
Yeah.
Thanks, girlfriend. No, after Sip Banyo, yes.
I want to hear Jameson's.
okay.
Let's change quick topic.
Oh, hold on, I'll just pause it.
Oh, look at you.
Look at technology.
Whoa!
Working like a champ.
Or just let it work when you keep rambling.
I'll just pause it real quick. All right. So, cheers, fellas.
Guys always do it when my cup is empty. Willie, your pants down? You ready to go for a jog? Yeah, I guess so. We need like 15 seconds. No, we're doing it right now. God damn it.
Better be tripping over your pants there, Willie, while we're running.
Getting good at handstands.
All right, cheers.
Okay.
All right, so bring it back around. You kind of mentioned the fact of like, do I
Literally
agree
right ass
essentially-
like, ah.
Do I essentially agree with what Donald Trump is doing with his whole attack on the press? And that's just kind of
Not necessarily
Nutshell.
agree, but ultimately, do you see that as an affront to free speech? His attack upon the news.
okay. So something that Jerry and I talked about last week is what my views on freedom of speech is. And Jerry said that he is an absolutist on it, and I agreed with that. And I agreed to the extent that you should be able to say whatever you want to say about whatever, as long as it does not essentially have a call to action that's a call for violence or, you know, a call to essentially like sex trafficking, something that is egregiously illegal.
It's like you should steal from 7-Eleven between the hours of 7 p.m. and 11 p.m. I condone it. I'm your president.
Yeah.
Steal
So-
Twinkies and Snickers bars. Yeah.
So beyond anything as essentially that, I am completely in favor of free speech.
Sure.
So what Donald Trump is doing essentially with the press, and I do feel like to an extent sometimes he's trying to limit what they can say, but at the same time, I don't think they're being completely biased. So,
Unbiased?
or unbiased, thank you. Sorry, they are being biased, so I guess what I should be saying. So I do think a lot of the times they're essentially trying to take things out of context or to say things just to try to sway your opinion one way or another, which I don't think is essentially fair. That being said, I don't think any type of attacks that happen on the press, whether it be from, let's say, if Hillary Clinton was president versus if Donald Trump is president, I don't think anybody should be able to attack the press. And like I said, if I wanted to go ahead and start Jameson's Post tomorrow and write the most hard-hitting, just negative reviews of Donald Trump, I think I should be able to do that without any type of fear of repercussion.
You
whether
don't
it
have any
becomes-
power.
What do you mean?
What I'm saying is, I hear what you're saying. What I think makes this very, very questionable is the sense that this is the leader of the free world who is openly saying the news syndicates in my country, save for a couple that are cool, are all fake news. Fuck them all. Don't listen to them.
Well, I think at that point it's your responsibility and my responsibility to question everything that he says.
And that's actually, I do agree with that. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying on one hand, I think it's a dick move to essentially beguile people by saying, you guys are all fake news, this and that. I think it's the responsibility as American citizens, voting people, who put these people into power, to be like, well, he's voicing his opinion. I think he's a fucking asshole, but he is voicing his opinion. I mean, let's face it, he has a bias. He was voted in on a specific party ticket, and he's saying X, Y, and Z. I think it is absolutely essential upon me, as a contributing member of society, to look at this and see it for what it is. I see it as theater.
So do you see autocratic tendencies within Trump and his sort of kind of just attacking the news or the media?
Donald Trump's ego is so big.
Do you think,
Oh,
before you answer, and sort of
Yeah.
kind of to just kind of get a big response from you here, is do you think there's fair criticism from the left on Donald Trump and says, you know what, Donald Trump is a little bit like the fascism that we saw in the 1920s. And obviously, this is obviously hyperbolic, but do you see why people would kind of infer the fascism of the 1920s? And do you see why people, do you think it's valid, or do you think it's completely just out of the norm to say that Trump's attack on the media and say you're fake news, right? You're whatever the fuck it is, right? Do you think that there's some kind of just a little bit of a modicum of criticism, or do you think that Trump's criticism of the media is fair, or do you think there's a modicum of charitability to the criticism that Trump gets on his attack on the media?
I think a lot of Donald Trump's problems, as far as with the media, are brought on by Donald Trump. I would say that some of his criticism is unfair. And I would say a lot of the different things that he is criticized for is because Donald Trump wants to make Donald Trump sound better than he is. That being said, I mean, I don't think everything that's said about him is right. I don't think he's the next, as some people have said, the next coming of Hitler. I don't think he's even the next coming of, like...
Didn't they say that about, like, the last 5 presidents?
Bush, whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, basically, name a Republican president.
Yeah.
I don't even think he's something even a little bit more conservative as far as, like, the next, Benito Mussolini, who I wouldn't say is, like, guess that conservative, but... I just think that to a point, like I said, it seems like they're trying to have a biased opinion as far as saying, like, see my point, I'm saying this, I'm in the one that's in the anchorman's chair, you're listening to me. Do I think that that's right? No, but do I think they still have a right to say whatever they're saying? Yes. I think people are smart enough, at least I would hope that they're smart enough, to see through some of the bullshit and have a conversation like we're having right now, and actually sit down and say, like, okay, he said this, what do we really see what's happening, but no, I don't know. I guess the fact of the matter is whether or not Donald Trump agrees with what somebody is writing, or whether or not somebody is writing something that seems very harsh or very in favor of what he's saying, I think they should have the right to say it, and I don't necessarily see there being, I don't know, anything wrong in what they're doing. Does that make sense? Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. It's, I don't know, I felt like a little bit of rambling there, but...
No, I mean, this...
Well, it's honestly, it's like a rock wall. You're scrambling for toeholds.
Yeah.
No, but I
Because
think
you
it's
are
good
moving
because...
towards an ultimate point.
Yeah, no, and I think it's good. Like, I think it's good that you flesh out your answers, and that's why I want to give you plenty of time. Like, you want to flesh out your answers, and you want to give a fully, however, wherever your thoughts take you, right? You want to give that response, right?
For sure.
Even if it takes you on a road that you didn't quite think it would take you on, right?
And I don't know, kind of what you were just talking about there, it did kind of make me think a little bit more, like, nobody likes to be criticized. Nobody likes to be told that they're doing something wrong, which is why a lot of the times I feel like whatever he goes off on a tangent calling CNN fake news, it's because those people are sitting there saying, like, well, clearly doing this wrong. You're clearly the wrong person for this job, and nobody wants to hear that as well.
So, to put it kind of like a little, not finalized, but maybe finalized for this conversation, does Trump pose a unique autocratic kind of tendency on American democracy, right? Is Trump the sort of the proto-fascist for American democracy, right? Is he the first coming, right? So
The elements are there.
just to juxtapose it, right? Yeah, so just to juxtapose it, the Weimar Republic there's a lot of, right, if you study fascism, and if you study Hitlerism, and if you study Nazism, the Weimar Republic had a lot of problems. But you could see a lot of the rhetoric that Trump and Hitler used, right? So I would pose the same question here, right? Do you see kind of some similarities can you see how the American Republic would fall, or is this just entirely hyperbolic? Is this just out of left field? Right? There's no reason to think that an economic populist like Trump would bring in the second coming of fascism to America, right? So I'd pose that question to Willie.
I really don't think it's going to go. I'm sorry. I just don't like to sit that long and get antsy.
Ants in my pants.
I don't see it going that way.
Yeah.
I really don't. I really honestly don't. I think there's too many mechanisms in place. I think there's too many societal norms in place that would prevent that from happening. Sure, are the tendencies there? Absolutely. But
So, like, what are some of the tendencies that you've seen in Trump?
the attack of media, the polarizing.
I would
The
say a lot of
polarizing
the
rhetoric that he
populism
puts
that I
out.
see in Trump. I would say a lot of the really just playing to the crowd. He does an amazing job of just sensing what the crowd wants.
Yeah, he's a
And-
salesman.
Yeah.
If you're sitting in front of me and I can see skepticism, be like,
Yeah.
hey man, listen, I know that you're feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah, if
about
I tell
this.
you want a second towel, oh no, don't worry, I'll sell you this, right? And that's what Trump is great at reading a crowd, right?
Yeah.
And that's why he holds multiple rallies. He holds rally after rally after rally.
That's
Why?
what he's
because
good at
he
doing.
He loves it.
He's good at appealing to the baser instincts of people.
Yeah.
That's what he's good at.
So is there that kind of autocratic tendency there? Is there a legitimate criticism where we say, you know what, we don't like that in our American democracy. We want more erudition. We want more of the.
I don't see
the
him becoming a
philosophy.
dictator. I see him corrupting things. Absolutely. I see him
So how do
gaming
you?
things.
So I would agree with the notion that he would corrupt things. So how do you see him kind of? And this would kind of segue us into another topic: is how would Trump corrupt politics? Where are we going now from Trump? How did Trump just kind of? Because I think Trump is very, very unique, right? I think
He
Trump
is. He is an anomaly.
He is
in every sense of the word.
So maybe corrupt isn't the right word. So how does Trump change things? How
I'm not
does-
saying corrupt. I'm saying
Yeah,
he is
yeah.
a corrupting element.
Yeah. So how does Trump just change things from now on? Right? Where does it go from here? Right? How does the Trump effect affect everything? Where does the next politician? If I'm the next politician, right, and I'm looking at American politics, and I'm saying, I can either go the Obama route and hope that I'm a young black male, and we've never had that before, right? So I can hope to play the identity politics, but that's played out. What do I do as a politician to kind of galvanize the crowd? I can't be the young black person anymore because that's played out. But, okay, maybe I can play to the populism, right? Maybe I do become a young socialist. A young socialist did just win. She just beat out the...
Oh, that 28-year-old gal
Yeah.
who was a bartender.
Yeah. She's a young socialist. She's a legitimate socialist, right?
Mhm.
How did she beat him out? Right? So that's the Trump effect, right? Is I am going to galvanize my base. I'm going to galvanize my crowd and say, vote for me because I have all these idealistic ideas, right? And so that's the Trump effect. And as a political strategist, I can't get caught up in my left-right, dichotomy. I have to think what is going to get me votes. And Trump knows how to get votes.
Well, what's
Very good at
refreshing?
that.
What's refreshing about that, as we stated earlier, I like the fact that he is taking the status quo and he is shaking it to its core.
Yeah.
I like that because long term, I think that the ramifications of that will be a healthier and more vibrant system.
But why would you think that it would be incentivized towards that?
I see the inherent good.
I see the inherent bad. I see how populism could just permeate throughout American politics.
Sure.
I see the deterioration of American politics because I don't think people are having what we're having right now is very erudite conversations. We are not having the conversations that people want to listen to. What people want to listen to is how I'm going to get paid and how I'm going to have a little more time off. That's what people care about. They don't care about the fact that, Islam is a complicated problem, and they don't care about all these
Because we're simple creatures, man.
Right.
We want our creature comforts.
right. So that's why I would just sort of shy away from the optimism. I would tend towards pessimism. I would say this Trump has just kind of shown why populism works, and the best popular, and from the Democratic Party, it's going to get worse. We're not going to get
So the optimism that I'm alluding to, I don't think it's airy. I don't think it's unfounded. What I'm ultimately saying is, I don't like the two-party system. That is where that comment is coming from.
and you're in the minority.
Yeah, I'm aware.
Yeah.
I'm an independent. I'm a minority. I know this. And as an independent, I like the fact that some crazy asshole is currently spouting off ridiculous rhetoric and attacking people at random. Like, oh, motherfucker, he changes policy on Twitter. That is the craziest thing I have heard in my entire life. You know what I mean? Like, think about that.
So exactly. So Trump. So this poses a very interesting question. What do you do, right? Like, you have Trump and you have Bernie Sanders. How do you choose, right? Because okay, you have the highfalutin answers. Oh, I voted for Gary Johnson, but okay, everybody knows that a libertarian vote doesn't mean shit, right? If
You're throwing
you
fuck
either
away.
voted for Trump or you voted for Clinton, it doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah.
It's just, you voted for one or the other. It doesn't matter. If you throw away your vote, you throw away your
But
vote.
what I'm ultimately saying is this. The reason that system has been organized in the way that it has is because the habit has been established. You break habit with things that are atypical, and we've got a very atypical
So you're trying
situation.
to break away from. Okay, so here's a very interesting concept. This is the concept of the tragedy of the commons. Are you familiar with the tragedy of the commons?
No.
Okay, so the tragedy of the commons is you have 4 people and there's one lake. There's 8 fish in that lake. 4 people, fish, 1 fish, and they have enough to feed themselves, right? The 4 fish that are left, right? So you have 4 fishermen. Each person gets 1 fish. There's 8 fish. After everybody fishes for 1 fish, there's 4 fish left. All of those fish reproduce fast enough so that there's 8 fish by the time the fishermen come back, right? So if everybody acts accordingly, there's enough fish so that every day, you're left with 4 fish. They reproduce quickly enough. There's 8 fish left in the lake. You come back, everybody gets 1 fish, right? The tragedy of the commons is if one person acts out of accordance,
It affects everybody.
it affects everybody, right?
Sure.
So one guy goes, "No, fuck that, I want 2 fish," right? Well, fuck, now you only have 3 fish, and now the
Isn't that
the
like the
3 fish-
definition of capitalism?
yeah. So now the 3 fish go, "Well, fuck, we can only reproduce, and we have 6 fish," and then everybody goes, "Well, fuck, I need more fish," right? So that's the tragedy of the commons, right? So now that we've explained this, right? How do you break that? How do you break that in American politics, right? Because this is what you have right now. Everybody's
Everyone's
just kinda-
getting a fish, man. There's like a significant
There's
percentage
a
of
lot
the
of
population that's not getting adequate health care, that's not getting a steady meal, that's
But this
not
is
getting
what- This is
education.
Bernie Sanders. This is tit for tat. Bernie Sanders. No health care. No.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that the argument that you're juxtapositioning onto this is essentially saying that everybody is getting theirs. And it's just not the case. There's a lot of people who are underemployed, or there's really not a ton of unemployed. There's really not.
Right, but
but
no,
there's
I
people
wasn't-
getting paid
I wasn't
extras.
saying that at all. I was saying Bernie is saying all of these things, right? Now we can make the argument that, and this is a very unpopular argument, but Steven Pinker posed this argument in his new book Enlightenment Now, is that we're all much better off than we were before, right? This is the best time to be alive.
We are, man. Look at the advent of medic. Like, look at how we're sitting.
But Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump would not argue that, right? This is not their argument. Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump would not argue this is the best time you're ever going to be alive and look at all this amazing modern medicine, right? This was lame ass Hillary Clinton's argument, right? This was her lame ass argument, but this was not Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders.
I would argue we've got it pretty good right now.
So no, I would argue we have it pretty good, but I kind of lost track of the conversation.
Yeah, so do I.
Anyway,
But no, I can see where you're coming from, in the certain sense.
wait, before we lose track, what the
Yeah.
heck were we talking about?
We were talking about things.
Guys, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, we lost track of that. I
Better
forgot.
things. This not.
Moving
Man,
right along.
loaded potato is
Yeah, loaded potato.
it's.
I guess we found the title of this podcast.
Yeah,
Loaded
it's.
potato podcast.
Every once in a while, sometimes you just want a fucking salad, just let's keep it light, like, how about that South Park, guys?
So should we move on to another subject since we seem to have lost our last one?
Yeah,
What the fuck were we talking about?
this is the side salad of loaded potato, guys.
All right, so
Keep it loose.
speaking of the Supreme Court, I would like to get both of your opinions on the cake.
Oh yeah, that is an interesting topic. So to thicken this conversation, the cake.
batter, if you will.
Yeah, to add an extra yolk to the batter that is the cake conversation, there was a gay couple. I believe it was in Denver. Am I mistaken in saying that? Boulder, Denver,
Or Denver.
We can say Colorado.
Colorado. Yeah, whatever. And they were shopping about for a cake, and a bakery turned them down when they were proposed at making a queer cake. Now, I find this interesting, and this is something that I think has been very understated in the news. This couple specifically went out of their way to find bakeries that they thought would have a problem with them, and then decided to raise a shit fit when things happened. I think that is the moral equivalent of asking an old person anything, because literally it can be anything. What do you think about like t-shirts, Grandma? I'll be like, well, those faggots wearing t-shirts. They're like, Jesus, like I was just asking.
What do you
how
think
you're
about my
doing.
black boyfriend?
Yeah, yeah, and then Grandma's head blew up. It was a mess. It was fucking horrible. So, I don't think businesses should be able to discriminate against people, but the argument always comes into play. If there was a cake on the shelf, can I say, no, you can't buy my cake because you're this? It's like, but dude, it's right there. Like that one, right? It's right there. I want that one. Instead, just like, I want an edifice of a giant cock, and I want pink frosting to finish the rim of the penis, and then I want white frosting blasting on to another cake face. And it's a man, and the beard will be made out of brown sugar. Start making it, buddy. I'm going to give you $300. You're my whore now. Like, I can see the argument that ultimately says, please go ahead.
Do consumers have a right to be protected? Do you think?
To a certain extent, yes. I mean, consumer protection policy.
But that is such a, you have to parse that so carefully. To a certain extent, what does that mean? Okay, if you're driving through Podunk, Nebraska, right? You're in the middle of the Bible Belt, right? You just started the Bible Belt, and you're a gay couple, and you're looking for gas, right? Hey, man, we've driven 300 miles. There's no gas station around because that's what the fuck Nebraska is.
Yeah.
Right? You've driven 300 miles. Hey, there's no gas station around, right? And this gas station owner sees you and you're holding hands with your couple, right? And you happen to be two dudes. And he goes, fuck you, get the fuck out of here.
That
Shuts
is
the
wrong.
gas station.
That I take issue with.
Right. But, okay, so at that point, what do you do? What do you do as the Supreme Court?
So,
of
the
country?
argument that I will make, and the argument that I believe was levied very heavily in this conversation, was the concept of an artistic expression. Let's say I'm a gas station attendant in Nebraska, and I see two gentlemen walking into my place of business, and they're holding hands. I have gas on the ready. Anybody can fucking plug it into their vehicle, swipe their card, and pull the trigger. That is very different from approaching me. Let's say I'm an artisan.
So you're
right?
ready. You're ready to play that role. You're ready to parse what is necessary and what's not necessary?
No, the federal government can only say you can't.
So because we can't parse that role, who's ready? Who do you nominate to parse that role? Who do you nominate? Okay, well, I have the perfect. I am the unalterable person, and says, oh, okay, well, gas is obviously necessary, but whatever it is, insert artistic expression here, right? Oh, that I am able to deny you service, right? So exactly.
To me,
right?
that argument's flimsy.
No,
Because
but
at the
it's
end of the
not.
day, if I have to
No,
specifically,
but it's not. It's not because you're saying, okay, well, gas. Obviously, gas. I'm obviously able to give you gasoline.
yeah, or
But,
a free
but
package.
as anything else, whether it's a Subway shop, right? I'm hungry. Oh, you're holding hands with your significant other. I'm not going to serve you. Where do you step
Okay,
the line?
okay. An assembly style creation of something. No. If I have to bake it, if I have to ice it, if I have to put lettering into it and specific decoration, as shitty as that is, I do not think that person should be forced to dole out their services to anybody without their consent.
Wait, what?
What I'm ultimately saying is, if that person turned down their signature custom cake, well then fuck
because
them.
the other person's gay.
Yes. Is that shitty? Yes, I agree with that. But do I stand behind the baker in that example? Yes, I do.
Why though?
Why? Because this person opened their business. If I already had something pre-made and established, that person should be able to purchase that. Be like, hey man, you're going to make something specific. Be like, dude, honestly, like, no. Like, I'm not going to make that. Like, if you just want to grab a cake off the shelf, go for it.
But does it matter what it is?
What do you mean?
Does it matter? Like, it could be a giant penis. It could be a giant black penis. It doesn't matter.
At the end of the day, like, I think it's illogical for anybody to turn down money. I don't give a fuck what you are.
Right, and so that is exactly the whole argument, right? It's
Yeah.
like, are you denying somebody just based on your own convictions, right? And so,
Which is
I
fundamentally
would pose
stupid
The
in my
question to
opinion.
Jameson, right, is like, where are we now in American liberties, right? Can I, if I own a gas station, right, and I hate gay people, can I just turn them down and say, no, actually, no, you know what? I don't want to give you my service. Go find something else. I don't care if I'm the only gas service for miles, right? Should I be able to say that, right? So just a little bit of backstory. I think I ultimately side with the business owner, right? I don't think federal governments should be able to impose whatever law and restriction they say they want to impose, right? I think the business owner should say, fuck you, I'm not going to serve you no matter what, right? So that's just my backdrop. Right? It's just, I would want to pose a question to you is, okay, you are in the Podunk, Nebraska, right? You are the only gas station for miles. What do you do, right? If you're a gay person coming into a gas station, you say, well, I need gas, but this fucking guy doesn't serve me.
Well, then you run into all sorts of different problems too. Because what if at that point you're like, okay, I'm protected as a consumer, and I can buy said gas, but he's denying me gas. And then what happens all of a sudden if you call up Sheriff Griffith, and like, hey, this gentleman won't sell me gas because I'm homosexual.
Yeah, I'm gay.
And then all of a sudden he's like, well, hey, guess what, queer? I don't like
Fuck
queers
off.
either.
Yeah.
You're fucked. I mean, because what do you do at that point? So I do think there's got to be a degree where the consumer is protected, but it also has to be that there's a point where the free market is still able to do its job, and that the government can't step in and be like, you didn't sell such and such to person because you're such and such beliefs and stuff like that. So it's such a crazy.
So do you think, so this is kind of the question that I couldn't quite pose to Willie, is do you think somebody should have that position? Somebody should be able to say, oh, well, I think this is where I would parse this, right? This is where I know the federal government could step in, right? Is there a position to be created, or is there a position just
That's such a fine line to walk, because then where does it stop?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
let's say all of a sudden you're like, okay, yeah, we got Mr. Arbiter over here that's going to go ahead and decide that, that's racist, that's homophobic, that's sexist. What other powers does he have? Because all of a
Yeah,
sudden you
but-
just put into perspective, like, it's that guy's opinion.
Yeah.
Where does the actual line
The
go?
problem with that is that there are terrible fucking habits established in the human persona that we have to actively break apart and fight. The best example I can think of was the combat against the separate but equal policies that were established with Plessy v. Ferguson. There were federal entities that had to go into place to essentially break up it, just like whites only, black only. What I'm ultimately saying is it shouldn't fall upon a municipal body to police whether or not party A or party B can get service from this due to X, Y, and Z. But sometimes they have to intervene because the tribalistic Neanderthal tendencies that we have living in this fucking postmodern society rear their ugly head and be like, well, you're a fucking this, so I'm not going to do this.
Well, let me go ahead and rephrase that to you an extent.
Sure.
So the reason that this cake or baker decided to go ahead and not bake this cake is because it was against his religious views. So his religious views are protected under the First Amendment. So why all of a sudden does it seem like what you just proposed, saying like you have somebody actually step in and pose like, well, you can't actually do this because of X, Y, and Z. He's protected under the First Amendment with his religious views. So why all of a sudden does an arbiter or somebody like that
He's
come in?
denying service. To what extent is he denying service?
But what extent is now he protected under his First Amendment rights?
Precisely, which comes to the side argument of artistic expression. Now, if I have a candy bar sitting on my shelf, I don't give a fuck what you are. It's prepackaged and ready to rock. Buy it. But if you're like, I want you to step into the back office and I'm going to give you my money as a contributing citizen, you are going to make me X, Y, and Z. Be like, no, because you
But should
fall
that
in
matter
line.
though? Like, should that matter? Like what they said?
Ideally, no.
Yeah,
Ideally,
but,
no.
Yeah, I understand the question that you're trying to pose, right? It's like they came into the bake shop. It's like, make me whatever, right? That shouldn't matter, right? You as a consumer should be able to come in.
But a
Now,
business.
but I don't agree with this position. But
Sure.
you as a consumer should be able to come in and say, I want that candy bar, regardless of who I am, right? But I think it shouldn't matter if you come in and say, I want that candy bar, or if I want you to make a penis for me, right? It doesn't matter, right? I think that question is sort of kind of.
But if it is
an ancillary
impeding
question.
upon. If it is impeding upon.
But what if the baker refused them service based on the candy bar that was just right there, right?
Well, then I would argue that's a different situation.
Right, and so that exactly, right?
So-
what would you argue there?
What I would argue is, dude, you already have it ready to rock. This is like, dude, you're a clerk at this point. This isn't any extension
what I
of
think
yourself.
you're introducing is unnecessary. What I think you're introducing
Mm-hmm.
is a position that doesn't have to be introduced. You're introducing something into the system that says, I am ready to be, judge of what
a hinge
deem
point
to
that can be abused.
yeah. What?
Yes.
Okay, I deem hey, person X. I'm trying to buy this candy bar from this person, but they won't sell me this, so I asked them to make this. So is this too offensive? Right. That's what I think you're introducing. Is
The function of the judicial system is to weigh in on specific circumstances. Now, do I think an absolute opinion would make things cleaner? Absolutely, they would. But the problem with that is there have been many different cases and many different precedents set throughout our history in this country where that has been abused. Now, I look back to race politics because it's really the most defining thing of American politics.
Okay.
To this day, it is. We have a terrible habit and tendency of denigrating against X, Y, and Z due to X, Y, and Z. The reason things like this get so nuanced and difficult is because we have the shadow of older precedents that essentially say we have to look at this in a very nuanced way, and we have to respect both, in the example of the cake maker, we have to respect, A, the buyers, a homosexual couple. They are doing something that is quote-unquote atypical from the status quo. They're gay. They're living a gay life. Good on them. We also have to respect them. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, exactly. Just like P&P. That's cool, man. I'm a P&V guy.
P&V.
Neato, gang. So on the other side of the fence, you have somebody that is expressing in a free way their freedom of belief, religion, like expression, whatever, and they're saying, hey man, you are asking me to do something that I am fundamentally opposed to a certain extent. Now that's where it gets murky. That's where you're never going to have a clean break and people are always going to disagree. I can refuse somebody the service of making them this ridiculous order due to X, Y, and Z because it offends my opinions on something. But in the same sense, is that the same argument that could be levied against you're a black man and because I own this bus, I am offended by the fact that you choose to sit in seats A and B when I specifically wish you to sit in seats Y and Z. So that's where the gray comes into the conversation, in my opinion. And that's where it needs to be levied, and that's where the conversation needs to happen.
Yeah, I think you leave too much of the gray up to people's sensibilities.
Sure.
And modern day interpretations. I would leave it less open to interpretation. I think I would not just be swayed by whatever modern sensibilities were.
Well,
I think, okay, so for example, you're a gay cake maker, right? If the gay couple came in and said, let's say they asked for the most extravagant thing, right? I want the biggest dick and I want it to be spewing the most cum everywhere, right? Let's say it was just incredibly...
Just egregious.
Yeah,
just egregious.
Right? I think that, okay, they should be able to ask for that. And obviously in an idealistic market, one gay cake maker would say no, and then the other one would say, I'll make this for you.
Sure.
Obviously.
Should they make a political conversation out of it? No.
Yeah.
I think that's a, no pun intended here, a dick move. But in the same sense...
But yeah, like I would hate to set up a position where, and I would draw the line here, I would hate to set up a position where the government is in a position to say, okay, I am the arbiter of what I deem to be egregious.
But what I say to that is the nastiness of we as a people has been so established. We have such a track record of being awful to each other that sometimes, though it sucks and though it goes against my principles as being a live and let live kind of guy, sometimes the government's got to step in. And I don't like that.
I would agree because that's exactly what happened in the 1965 Civil Rights Movement. Right?
Yeah.
The government stepped in and said, you know what, you're being too racist.
Yeah, dude.
We have to step in and kind of, mitigate this level of racism.
Little black girl's going to go to
This girl
elementary
wants to get a
school.
fucking sandwich and you won't let her sit at the bar. Right? Okay, I understand that. Right? Sometimes you have to take dramatic efforts.
And that's exactly the argument that I'm positing.
Yeah.
Though I don't like the fact that we are forced to absolutes and extremes to provide that person a fair market to find their cock cake. I'm just going to call it the cock cake argument because it makes me laugh.
Trying to find our cock cake.
Yeah. I'm just a boy out in the world trying to find a cock cake. But therein lies the point. Though I think the market should, under natural conditions, flush out the malefactors that would essentially say, no cock cake for you, to being like, what's your bid? $650? Yes. Boom.
All right, so
I will take that transaction.
Okay, so I'm a huge component of the free market, and
Yes.
I honestly feel like there are a few things that the free market can't fix. Overall, I think it can fix most issues, and truth be told, in this situation, I feel like it very well could. But let's go ahead and rephrase it again, though.
Sure.
Let's say, for example, you are in an extremely conservative neck of the woods where the population is like 50,000 people and 48,000 people in that community are hardcore Christian conservatives, and I'm using that term loosely to say like a lot of hardcore Christian conservatives believe the same values as far as like gay marriage being wrong.
I'm following your train of logic.
Well, what do you do in that situation if you're the gay person and you're in that very small minority and all of a sudden you're like, hey, I'm going to go ahead and try to buy this cake, but all of a sudden all the bakers are like, no, I don't believe in this, and your next closest town is 3 hours away.
See, that right there is precisely my point.
Okay.
So there is a tyranny at market at play, yet it's not due to anything economic, it's due to something that's more societal, and that is something that I'm fundamentally opposed to. That's not fair.
agree.
And it fucking sucks that the government has to step in to fix that situation. But unfortunately, with the hand that we dealt, just to back up about 30 seconds, he posited a specific question. In a civilization of 50,000 people, let's say 48,000 people
You posed
are,
this to me, basically.
yeah, very, very hyper-conservative or very, very blah, 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 blah. You get it.
Yep.
Gay couple, want to buy a cake. Nobody in that fucking town's going to sell them a cake. Is that constitutional?
No, I
The
think
nearest
it-
cake is
yeah.
300 miles away. Is that constitutional?
No, I think you have a right as a consumer.
Precisely. That's where I have to say you have to live in the gray. The reason I have done well in the world of sales and just random retail nonsense is because that's what I have embraced. I have embraced those doctrines because at the end of the day, the whole reason there is a judicial body is due to the fact that the world is gray. We all have different proclivities and interests and beliefs and different influences that force us to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, everything against my instinct says to force business owners to make that decision.
I agree with you.
But I think, yeah, I would understand if nobody's willing to sell you whatever it is. I think you have a right to say, well, I want this product, and even if it's the most egregious thing, I think somebody should sell it to you. And yeah, I think we do have to live in that gray area.
Yes, the gray. Which normally in most day-to-day conversations, you and I as human beings who have empathy and want to live in a harmonious manner, because despite all the nonsense that we see on the news, we are seeking out connections.
Yeah.
Because we're people. We are a communal living, societally focused creature. We want to make bonds. Hey man, you're good at this, I'm good at this. Why don't we help each other out and then we'll both prosper? I would like to think that those mechanisms can fix most issues, and in 99% of conversations they can. In that situation, it was extreme. This couple went out of their way to find somebody who would not bend on a specific subject, and they chased that rabbit all the way to the Supreme Court. And we have an interesting conversation to chat about on top of your iPad. And do I feel as though maybe that baker was used for political gain and maybe prestige, and I guarantee a Kickstarter might have been funded for that couple? Sure, I do. But in the same sense, was an example made that brought to light maybe an important conversation as far as what liberties need to be maintained or what consumer rights need to be maintained? Absolutely. That's where it gets gray. And when you start planning your heels and getting absolute, I think that's when a lot of very unexpected and unintended adverse side effects can occur. And that's all about got to say about that.
So, Jameson, how would you respond to that? How would you respond to the forcing of American business owners to, okay, let's say you were the only one for thousands of miles that was able to produce that service, oil change or gas, whatever it is, how would you, my religious sensibilities would go against X, right? I am Muslim and I hate to see women out of the veil, right? And so if a non-veiled person comes in and I'm the only gas owner, how would you respond to that? How would you say, okay, well, I'm the only gas owner for miles? Does distance play a role? Does scarcity play a role? Like, how would you respond? Should we set a precedent, based on exclusivity?
It's such a hard question because there's so many different things to take into factor, but I think the biggest thing that when it really comes down to is a morality type factor is, am I going to leave this person that's at my gas station and the next closest gas station is 100 miles away and he clearly doesn't have enough in his tank to even make it 10 miles away? Am I going to leave him stranded? Or am I going to bake this cake for this couple, or am I going to force them to drive 3 hours one way and then 3 hours back, 6 hours total to go ahead and get a fucking wedding cake? I'd like to think from the morality aspect of things that people are good enough to be like, you know what, fuck it.
Yeah, but a lot of the times
the problem
people
is they're
aren't
not.
moral enough to take that responsibility. So should the federal government come in and say, you know what, you're not moral enough, so we're going to decide for you what your morality is.
You know what? I'm gonna
And
say
we're going to force you.
I'm gonna say no, because at that point it's if you give a mouse a cookie. Because at that point, all of a sudden they're gonna start saying, okay, you were cool with us stepping in here. Let's take it one step further. We're gonna step in here. And it sucks because all of a sudden it makes people think like, oh, well, Jameson all of a sudden isn't in favor of gay marriage, which is not true. I am. Whatever. If you were gay and you want to get married, get married. But the problem that I have is that it comes down to a bigger picture where I honestly think that the government all of a sudden starts seeing that they can just take baby step, baby step, baby step, and start getting involved in every single aspect of people's life. And I know people are like, well, that's extreme, but I don't think it is, because if, like I said, it's if you give a mouse a cookie, they're going to want a glass of milk, and this is that exact situation where if you go ahead and let them start deciding on this, they're going to take it one step further. Now, people will also be like, well, what about the civil rights movement of the 1960s? I think that was a very clear-cut case of something that had gone back hundreds of years, and that we had clearly gone out of our way to start really hurting, people of a different race. But it was definitely the right movement, and I think at that point it's put a lot of different things into perspective that we can go off of at that point these days. But
Sorry to cut you off. But
yeah.
could you give me a beer?
Could you get him a beer? Willie, could you get him a beer? Parkour hardcore. Parkour! But no, I mean, I guess when it comes down to it, I just really want to say that I don't think that it's right for the government to start stepping in and tell people what's right, because that is just the first step into letting them take more and more steps into your everyday life. And it's a very, very extreme opinion, but I think that's a sword I'm willing to die on.
Definitely, I would definitely agree with the civil libertarian aspect of that. So I think we've been at this for quite a while.
Probably about 2 hours.
Quite how long, but this is kind of this is more of a fun thing that I'd kind of like to broach with both of you
2 hours and 20 minutes.
before we wrap up.
Where is the most exotic place you've ever made whoopee?
All right, so alien civilizations. What do you guys think? Do you guys think that modern society is the most modern society, or do you guys think that there's been a little more to human civilization? Just kind of poking a little bit,
Sure.
broaching.
So are we talking like when you say a little bit more to human civilization? Are we talking about a little bit more to human civilization on this Earth? Or are we talking just like in the universe?
I don't know.
Aliens. Give us a scope.
I don't
Just
know
say something,
where to
and
broach
then we'll
'cause
go from
I'm
there.
a rookie, so you guys just kind of
Okay.
take it and run with it.
That's what she said.
It's a very
2 hands.
it's a very broad spectrum that we're talking about here, because the universe is over 90 billion light years across, and that's in like literally any one direction that you're pointing here. So in that, there are trillions upon trillions upon trillions of different galaxies, stars, planets, things like that. So I do believe that it would just be silly to go ahead and say like, planet Earth, only one in the entire universe that has life. That being said as well, it's so hard to comprehend time to you and me, because like the human average lifespan is what, like 80, 90 years tops. I mean, you get some people that are like 100 to 110, but that's pretty rare.
Anomalies.
Exactly. So even when you look at just the universe's age of being roughly about 14.5 billion years, there's so many different opportunities that could have had life arise over the years, and then not only just arise, but essentially collapse. And not just here on Earth, but all over the universe. So I think there's been there's just so many different forms of intelligent life and non-intelligent life out there in the universe. And I even think here on Earth that we're not necessarily the first civilization that's ever actually been on Earth. It's 4.5 billion years old. And there's all sorts of different evidence that suggests that even another form of advanced life, maybe not as advanced to this point that we are today, with technology and space travel and the internet, but I mean even maybe to another Stone Age type advancements, there's probably been on this planet as well, and it's been extinct and rose again and then been extinct again, because over 90% of life that's ever existed on Earth has been extinct. So who's to say what their actual capacities were? But no, that's kind of my take on aliens. I don't know if we've ever been visited per se, because like I said, it's a big universe.
Yeah,
But-
aliens not. It's like, for lack of a better term, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Is there something else? I think would be the best way to say it.
Well, yeah, even that's also kind of for lack of a better, like what is I guess, okay, here's a good one. What is intelligent civilization to you?
Me?
Yeah.
I kind of foresee us reaching a.
No. Before you go out to what it can mean.
Well, no, I think that's important because I think all life is circular.
Oh,
So-
yeah. So what would classify as intelligent life for you?
Me? Intelligent life. Something that is self-aware.
Is it?
Intelligent life?
Good.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
the biggest
right, no, yeah,
conversation
so-
right now
so,
is
like-
life. Is there bacteria living on some random asteroid
Yeah.
floating around the Milky Way galaxy?
So the biggest thing that Darwin posited was you don't have to have something, and even Alan Turing, right? You don't have to have something that is self-aware. In his computers, right? Computers aren't aware that they're calculating math, for example, right? So you don't have to have something that's self-aware that it's doing something and it's creating these massive structures, right? What we would deem intelligent, right? So that's why I would posit to you, what do you think intelligent life is, right? Is it self-aware, or is it so we can be at some level conscious and be aware, right? So what is intelligent civilization as you deem it to be?
Well, I think that's a whole different can of worms. I would say, to go back to the simple argument, has there been other life aside from us, be it on this planet or anywhere else, in the infinite that is the universe in which we reside? Yeah, I think so. I mean, do I have any specific evidence? No, but I mean, statistically, come on, man. Like, what are the odds that something else by accident didn't happen? Even if it didn't make it past a fucking multicellular organism that's just splashing around in a puddle, something had to be out there. I think we're a chemical reaction.
Yeah, but
And-
on this planet or anywhere?
This planet, there's been enough civilizations within human
So
civilization.
it's like a freaky deaky idea. Like, what do you think? Like
My
Assassin's
freakiest
Creed?
deaky idea?
Assassin's Creed, like
My
you have,
freakiest
like,
deaky
yeah,
idea?
get
Honestly?
freaky, get weird,
Alright, cool. I'm gonna get as weird as I want to.
Awesome.
freaky deaky.
Let's go down this route.
I think we
Get
were
freaky.
seated, personally.
You think what?
I think we were seated. I think we
Okay.
were mined for resources. Yeah, that's what she said. But I personally
so
think
seated so
Oh.
I think something
got
was
seated
here.
so hard.
Yeah, it's something that I like, that I think is interesting, and as an indifferent motherfucker, like, I don't believe it hard, to the sense that I report to a building and worship something, giggity. But yeah, I think we were seated. I think that something came
So you
here.
believe in panspermia?
Yeah,
Nice.
I do actually.
But like to a more complicated level, because panspermia can mean a lot of different things, right?
Sure.
You can have life, but not really have intelligent life. But you can still have life still spread.
Well,
across the
use the
cosmos.
architect
So do you believe,
argument in
do you believe there was
Prometheus.
intelligent life spread throughout the cosmos, or do you think it was just kind of like, here's the machinery?
Well, I think there's
Some
a
form of intelligence.
I think there's a series of momentums that are occurring throughout the universe, right? And no matter where they came from, eventually they reach an apex, and maybe they ascend to something that's maybe dimensional. Like, we're on our way. I think we are so rapidly and explosively advancing the technology that is in front of us that I think there is a synergy that is going to be reached.
But-
That is going to change the species that we are, and then we are going to be unrecognizable from what we were.
Right, but that doesn't mean that there was intelligent life spread. Okay, so intelligence is not synonymous with consciousness. consciousness, the fact that you're aware that you're aware of anything doesn't correlate to intelligence.
Would a virus be considered intelligence?
It can be intelligent.
Okay.
Right? It can be very intelligent as to the machinery around it.
Be very functional in the environment that it's in.
But a virus is unintelligent as to what it's doing, right? It's not. You are aware of at least something around you. You're aware that something's happening.
Sure.
Right? But it's not. You're not. An intelligent life doesn't necessarily mean that it's aware of what it's aware, right? So, based on the simple fact that intelligent life can spread other intelligent life, doesn't mean that intelligent life is spreading conscious life, right? It doesn't mean that conscious life is.
Well, I'm not saying they're doing it deliberately, like a fucking benevolent being. I'm just saying that they leave an essence.
Right. So that's a very interesting question. Is intelligent life just spreading? Because a virus can spread unintelligibly, and it's just kind of following its machinery. But if you are conscious, how would you spread life? Right. You're conscious to a certain extent. You're intelligent to a certain extent. Right. You're more intelligent than a chicken. Right, you're here somewhere on the scale, right? But how would you spread life, right? And as a conscious being, how would you spread life?
And this is my life.
But how would you deviate? How would you say this is what matters? This is what is actually. How would you tell, right? And this is what's so interesting about consciousness and intelligence is that intelligence doesn't correlate to consciousness, right? You can have incredibly intelligent things, and they're not scaling to your consciousness. The fact that you have more intelligent things doesn't mean that they're more aware of themselves. You can have incredibly intelligent chess machines, but they're not scaling to how conscious they are, right? And so, how does that correlate, right? How would you spread more consciousness, right? Which is what matters. And yeah, that's how I would posit this question: is how freaky deaky is your idea, and how does that spread to consciousness?
Well, I mean, I'm not looking to get into the subjectivity of the definition of consciousness. I'm more focused on the end state. What brought us here? And I think that is an interesting conversation in its own. Like, I can definitely see.
So if panspermia brought, right? Let's say Prometheus is real.
Sure.
Right? Let's say everything about Prometheus is real. How would that being, how would that super buff, intelligent being know that it's spreading consciousness? Right?
I don't think it cares that it is. I think it was mostly just a last-ditch effort.
Why wouldn't that matter to it? Why wouldn't that be the essence of what it cares about?
Well, if we were going by exactly that example, why did it start tearing those fuckers apart the moment it became aware? It was just like,
wouldn't your first concern as a conscious being be, I don't care how stupid that thing is, but if it's conscious, I would care that it's conscious, right?
Why? Why would I care?
Because consciousness is the only thing that matters. Consciousness is the only thing that can't be an illusion. You are aware, no matter how innately you are, or how just unimportantly, or how small it is. You are aware that it is something to be like it is to be you.
Sure.
Right?
So I could see the importance of that.
Right. So here's a perfect example. Nick Bostrom poses the paperclip example. You could have a super intelligence that is only focused on making as many paperclips as it wants. And it's going to kill everything. It's going to kill everybody. But it's a super intelligence that's only focused on making paperclips. Right? That's why you would care. Because it's a super intelligence that is exponentially more intelligent than you are. But it's only focused on making paperclips. So it's not aware that it's only making paperclips. It's not aware that it's wiping out all conscious things on the planet, right? Its only goal is to make paperclips, right? So you care about consciousness because that's what it means to be what it is to be something else, right? And so consciousness is the only thing that matters to some extent, right? So as a conscious being, you have to care and say, well, if I'm going to spread other life, I would care that it's at the very least aware. And this I think, is the magic question. This, I think, is Turing's most famous question, and said, how the fuck do I know that that thing knows that it knows? Right? This is the Turing test. Right? This is why Turing posed the question and said, how the fuck do I know that you are actually in the know? Right? And you can ask, Turing asked so many questions, but we don't actually know.
Well,
Go.
I guess the best response I would have to that is
Fuck you.
no, not
Fuck
even
shit.
not even that. It was just like maybe they just did it for a laugh. Maybe they don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
I mean, there's parents out there that beat their children.
Yeah.
That goes against the entire argument of the consciousness
That would
thing.
be the saddest thing ever.
Yeah, it sucks, but it is. So who's to say that they just aren't doing it for just like, let's just see what fucking
Shits and
happens, and I could
giggles.
end it whenever I want to, just cause. It's like having an ant colony that I just leave in the sun and allow to bake. Is it fucked up? Could be, but who cares? Whatever, I'm bored. Yeah, I think people are always grasping for reason, and sometimes things really aren't attributed to reason. Sometimes things just are, and to dive into them with any great detail is, yeah, I think intellectually it's an effective exercise, and that helps right there. What you're doing, taking drinks, because it's how you tolerate it. But sometimes, yeah, sometimes there is no rhyme or reason, and I think so many different institutions have been formed as an affront to that very simple logic, where it's just like nothing matters. Nuh-uh. Like I think that right there is particularly interesting.
So Jameson, how would you respond to that? Nothing hurts me.
Yeah.
I'm so dumb. Wow. I mean, I don't know. I think Willie really hit the nail on the head with that explanation. So, I mean,
Is it dark? Mm-hmm.
yeah, but it
But sometimes
seems accurate.
things just don't matter sometimes. And I think that's kind of
But I would think, I understand. So I understand why you would pause that. Right, you would say nothing matters, but
I'm not a true nihilist though, that's the thing.
right. But if you at the very least had any semblance of consciousness, right, you would say this matters, right? So this is why, out of anything, things like vegetarianism pop up, right? Because you would at least think animals have some semblance of consciousness, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have some awareness of what it is to be aware, right? And so, yes, for the most solipsistic or even nihilistic intelligent creatures, you would also have some creatures that would say, yeah, I want to create consciousness somewhere else, and I want to create intelligence somewhere else. And I don't think you would have that level of nihilism, though. I don't think that nothing would matter, right?
But if your civilization has been around for that long, and by fucking accident you can just make things occur.
Take The Sims, for example.
Sure.
The Sims. The Sims is a great example.
Uh-huh.
How many people played The Sims, and how many people felt bad that their Sims were dying? I felt bad.
Yeah.
I looked at my Sims and I was like, there's a pool ladder.
Yeah.
I know this isn't nobody. This was, and it doesn't have to be The Sims. This is in Fallout.
It's a fucking simulation.
So take Fallout for example.
I always played a good character.
Felt bad, and it was
Me
just
too.
me. And now
Yeah.
I'd be like, I could rape you, like I could do whatever the fuck I wanted, but it was just me, and I would still be like, here's like I'm gonna do the right.
Would you say
thing.
that's morality, or was that conscious?
Well, it's both. I don't think there's a distinction without a difference here. I think the two are synonymous because at some point you're kind of aware, and even though you're kind of projecting, anthropomorphizing these things, right? You're saying, all right, like this thing obviously in Xbox 360 technology.
But I
these
think
things
ultimately
are
you go
nice.
back to that point. You're anthropomorphizing it. It's you are superimposing your idealisms as an emotive, socially interdependent monkey man.
Yeah.
That is what you are. It's what you are. It's what I am.
Yeah.
This creature could have an entirely different set of bio. They could be they could be fucking silicon based as opposed to carbon based, and they're just like, you just mathematically don't make sense.
Dude.
Yeah,
Like, they could love it.
Yeah.
They could love all of this, and you don't know because you have no way of knowing.
this. I mean, like, that again. That's where I tend to shy away from the conversation, where it's
Yeah.
just like, I don't presume to understand something that put me here purposefully or even on accident. This could just be a fucking show for them. This could be a joke for them. This could be anything. This could
So we
literally
could be in a simulation,
It's
according
like that South Park episode
Sure.
where they're
Yeah.
watching everybody.
yeah, Earth.
Next time on Earth.
Yeah, the Jews are really mad at the fucking blah blah blah. Yeah, like that right there is a perfect example. Like, I don't wish to sit and ponder how they would think about me because I
But-
can't comprehend that.
Okay, so but would you say that the worst possible misery for everybody is the worst thing? Would you say that, okay, if the worst possible misery for everybody is the worst thing, any deviation from that, right? Like some person feels better is better intrinsically, right? Would you agree with that axiom?
Would you repeat that one more time?
Okay, so the worst possible misery for every conscious creature is the worst. Like, this is your corner. This is where you would start from any moral reason.
This is zero.
Yeah, the worst possible. Right? There's no silver lining. It's just the worst possible misery for everybody. Right? This is any conscious creature. This is the bottom. Like, that's the worst thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's where you. That's your zero. Any deviation from that, right? Any, like, one guy says, this is not bad, right? Anything from anything like that is better, right? Would you say that that's better?
Well, you're saying any improvement upon the absolute worst case scenario is an improvement.
Yeah. So would you say that that's reasonable, or would you disagree with that?
I would say logically that's reasonable.
Right, but a lot of people disagree with that. A lot of people would disagree with that notion.
What would be their argument for that?
Saying that
Because-
somebody saying a situation is better
because-
than the absolute worst situation is a
No,
better
they
situation?
would, no, but they would argue that you can't tell what good or bad is. They would say you can't intrinsically say what good or bad is just subjective to whatever you think good or bad is.
Okay, so in that argument, Adolf Hitler killing all the Jews would argue that that was probably a good thing as opposed to that actually being
Because
a bad
the Jews
thing.
can't, right? Yeah, because the Jews
Because
can't
he
know what.
can't essentially, yeah, it's the
Yeah.
Jews don't know exactly what a good or a bad thing
But
is.
that is an actual argument in moral philosophy.
Well, that's moral, but where does the consciousness aspect of that come in then?
Right, but that is an actual argument in moral philosophy. But the consciousness part comes in because, as Sam Harris would argue, the consciousness part is the only thing that matters. The consciousness, the fact that you're aware of anything, is the only thing that matters. Right? So people outside of the moral philosophy would say, well, no, you can't quite decide what's good or bad.
But the fact that you
Who are
simply
you-
have a consciousness is the only thing worth having at that point, even
Yeah.
if you're in the worst absolute situation. So, well, that's fucked up.
So, for example, heaven and hell.
Yeah.
Right? So heaven and hell is a good example, right? If you're in heaven, you're in the perfectly blissful situation. If you're in hell, you're in the worst possible misery for whatever it is that you thought.
But again, these are all notions that
But yeah,
our
exactly.
civilization
So, yeah,
is
exactly.
fucked
So
up.
this slope that you're going down is exactly what people would argue is this notion of us, this notion that we're the only arbiters of what good or bad means. Right? Do you see the slippery slope? Right? Do you see
the argument that you're making? Yes.
Right. So you're saying, we're the only ones that can come up with these notions of good or bad.
I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm just saying I haven't met the other force yet, so I really don't know how they're going to react.
What do you mean other forces?
Well, the argument you're saying is ultimately what you circle back to from what my understanding is, we are really the only bellwethers of good and evil.
Right, exactly, and that's a problem. What do you mean good and evil? Like, if bad means anything, bad has to mean worst possible.
So you're
result
arguing
for
bad
everything.
is like this definitive thing that transcends species, planets, societies,
Yeah,
civilizations.
it has to mean something.
Sure, but I haven't quite flushed out what that is against the other societies. I mean, I think the simple tenets make a lot of sense.
But
Can't
what does
steal your
bad
shit.
mean to you?
Me?
Yeah.
Infringing upon you as a person, taking your shit, murdering you.
So yeah, exactly. So if bad means anything, it means that.
Sure.
And it's the worst possible misery for you, right? That has to mean something bad, right? If it means anything, that has to mean something bad. And so if good means anything, it's the kind of the opposite of that, right? And so to kind of just pose that onto reality, right? We have to be able to live in a moral world where the worst possible misery isn't inflicted upon you, right?
Yeah, I would say so. A world in which you're preventing the worst possible misery from occurring to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I think.
Fucking conversation.
Well, no, I'm not saying it's a bad conversation. I'm saying like.
No. I mean, I forgot the original point of the conversation.
Oh, I think we were
aliens
talking.
exist.
I think we were talking about would a non-human species even jive with that, essentially. What our worst possible? Is there a true basement, essentially? It's like, where's our ground zero of what's the worst possible case?
No, I think the original track of the conversation was, would a conscious creature, find, or would a conscious creature pose other conscious creatures to, unintelligent, or would it try to find a way to, make consciousness as pleasurable as possible?
You could say that was kind of the premises of Matrix,
Yeah.
because essentially everybody was unaware that they were in the Matrix, so essentially they were just living their life, which to them would have been essentially just a pleasurable outcome until they were actually awoken to the idea, or woke as some people would say, to the idea that
Get woke, bro.
that they were actually living in some kind of simulation, and that they were actually being controlled by another entity. In this situation, kind of what you just described, to be like another entity controlling us, and we're just like, whoa, man, we're living in their reality of what they perceive to be good and evil. Is that kind of what you were going with?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fucked up.
Well,
that's the reality I don't want to live in. But I don't seem like I have a lot of control over it.
yeah.
Oh,
Man, this is a gnarly podcast.
yeah. Loaded potato.
Yeah.
Well, for those of you who stuck around through our crazy ramblings there at the end, we appreciate you listening. Once again, this was brought to you by Cold Coors Light.
Don't forget.
Yeah, so...
Don't you forget the delicious taste of Blue Paddle Pilsner from New Belgium Brewery.
Yep. So if any of those actual breweries would like to support this podcast, we would be greatly amenable to that.
We love money and free products. I'm a big fan of hoodies.
Personally, yeah, I'd just be all for the free beer. But,
Yeah.
you know.
I'm a cheap date. Just keep me drunk and I'll do all sorts of stuff for you.
But Jerry, you did a phenomenal job, essentially mediating this entire podcast.
Moderator.
Moderator.
Yay, the great moderator.
Kept us on task. He kept us asking questions. I don't know. I appreciate that, because we could have just gone down so many different rabbit holes.
Yeah.
But he kept us on the straight and narrow for this whole thing. So
2+ hours.
yeah, which can't be easy.
3 hours.
Yeah. So I want to thank you for that and for your time for coming out here.
Yeah.
Willie, thank you so much for actually making it.
I penciled you guys in. It happened.
What's today? Thursday? No, I actually work. Fuck you guys.
Yeah. Hey man, don't judge me. Just because I can't read numbers,
Yeah.
man.
I've only been doing it since 2nd grade. It's terrible.
Yeah, it's fucking awful. What time is it? 13 o'clock? Yeah, might be. I don't know. Fuck you.
All I know is that the sun's not out, and I better get back home before it shows up again, or the wife gets
You
angry.
don't want me turning into a pumpkin, do you? I don't know what time it is.
So, appreciate you showing up, and once again, thanks for anybody who listens, and we appreciate you guys. So,
Till next time.
till next
God
time.
bless
Till
America.
next time we piss you off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for being offended with us.
Yeah.
Coming at you like a
Dude, that's a good sign up.
Right?
Yeah.
Thanks for being offended with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Fuck you and fuck me too.
we'll see you guys all next time.
Woo! Woo!